Monday, May 2nd, 2005, the police station in the French town of Egmore. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an officer answered a call that seemed strange to him, to say the least. On the line was an informant claiming that something terrible might happen to a young woman in a few hours. The informant explained that a couple was sitting at a table on the terrace of the L'Escale bar in Egmort, and the police needed to act immediately because her companion was extremely dangerous. The officer who answered the call heard a panicked voice on the other end shout, "The man who just left me is planning to abduct a girl. He's dangerous, and I think he's going to do something terrible." The caller was 63-year-old local resident Dominique Tarasco. Tarasco's voice trembled as he told the police about a conversation he had with a friend earlier that day. His friend was a cruel and dangerous man, and from their conversation, Tarasco deduced that he intended to harm a young girl. The police tried to obtain more information from Dominique, what his friend looked like, his name, who they should be looking for. However, despite his initial willingness to help, Tarasco refused to reveal his friend's name, stating that he feared for his own life. No promise of protection could compel him to disclose the name. However, he did provide the police with the location where his friend was supposed to meet. He said his friend would meet an unsuspecting girl on the terrace of the L'Escale bar. Tarasco also gave the police a description of his friend's car, a green 1994 Seat Ibiza. Time was running out rapidly. If an abduction was planned, the police didn't have time to extract more information from Tarasco. 4 officers got into 2 cars and immediately headed to the bar. They arrived at the establishment around 6:15 p.m. The police turned off their sirens and pretended to be just enjoying themselves at the bar. It was crucial not to spook the suspect. However, they quickly realized that trying to find unknown abductors and the girl was nearly impossible. It was the last evening of a 3-day weekend, and the streets, as well as the bar's terrace, were crowded with couples having a good time. None of the girls appeared frightened. Not knowing whom to look for, 2 officers started scanning for the Seat Ibiza. An hour passed, but the police couldn't find the couple or the car. Detectives began to wonder if Dominique had been mistaken. They called him to clarify the details he had provided. Suddenly, Dominique's heart sank. He realized that he had described the wrong car. In reality, his friend drove a gray 1994 Citroën ZX. The police were incredibly frustrated that they had been searching for the wrong vehicle while the Citroën might have slipped right under their noses, and they wouldn't even have noticed. After another thorough search, they confirmed that they couldn't see the needed car anywhere. The race against time to save the girl came to a forced halt. The police were at a dead end. Since Dominique refused to provide more information, there was nothing they could do. The officers returned to the station and checked if there were any reports of missing local girls, but there were none. Dominique had given the police incomplete and inaccurate information. A logical question arises. Why did they believe him in the first place? Dominique Tarasco was known to the local police. Officially, he was involved in collecting recyclables, but unofficially, he was the owner of an illegal nightclub near Egmore. The seemingly simple wooden shed housed a popular establishment frequented by both local celebrities and less reputable individuals. The police wanted to shut down the illegal club, but Tarasco managed to strike a deal with them. He had become a police informant, and in exchange, law enforcement turned a blind eye to his business. Tarasco had already been of great use to the police, providing them with information about impending crimes that had led to several arrests. However, none of these cases had been as serious as a human abduction. 2 days later, a 25-year-old man named Sylvain Rosin walked into the police station in Marseille, 180 kilometers from Egmore. Sylvain was extremely worried as he had been unable to contact his wife, Elodie Morel, for 2 days. She had left home to meet with a well-known photographer in Egmore. Sylvain explained that 28-year-old Elodie had worked as a waitress in bars and restaurants for most of her life, but she had grown tired of long night shifts, unpredictable working hours, low pay, and difficult customers. Given her interest in the fashion industry and natural beauty, she decided to pursue her long-standing dream of becoming a model. In April 2005, she registered on a website for people aspiring to work in the fashion industry. Elodie applied for any modeling job she could find, and then she came across an incredibly enticing offer. Renowned photographer Nicole Forestier was looking for models to represent Rolls-Royce. The photo shoot was scheduled to last for 5 days, and the 3 selected models would receive €1,000 for each shooting day, with expenses for food, accommodation, and transportation covered. Furthermore, the girls who impressed would travel to the United States as representatives of Rolls-Royce. This was Elodie's dream job, and she understood that her chances were slim with fierce competition ahead. Nevertheless, she submitted her application to participate in the competition. Prepared for rejection, she was overjoyed when Nicole wrote to her, informing her that she had secured the job. The photographer explained that Elodie had precisely the look she was seeking. When Sylvain heard that Elodie had been chosen as one of the 3 models for the photo shoot, her enthusiasm became infectious, although he did wonder if this could be a trap set by people preying on young, attractive girls. The police asked Sylvain why he allowed his wife to meet with the photographer in the first place, and he replied that he trusted his wife, who was an intelligent woman and would not fall for a foolish trick. Moreover, he felt that a meeting with a woman in a public place in the middle of the day couldn't hold any danger. The last message Sylvain received from his wife came on May 2nd at 9:30 p.m., a few hours after her meeting with the photographer. It read, "Kisses, everything is going fine. I'll call you tomorrow when I can. Kisses and hugs. We'll talk later." While the police spoke with Sylvain, they sensed that he might be hiding something. He tried to evade their questions, but eventually confessed that he and his wife had been arguing frequently recently and had even decided to separate, although they continued living together for the sake of their son. The police believed that the couple's relationship and Elodie's last message suggested that she might have chosen not to contact her husband voluntarily. However, Sylvain insisted that there was no reason for his wife to conceal a new romance, if there was one, and that she would never, ever abandon their son. She had always wanted their son to grow up in a loving family, something she herself had lacked in her childhood. The police had no doubts that there could be a million innocent reasons why the young woman hadn't been in touch with her husband. Perhaps she had no cell phone signal, or she had lost her phone. However, Sylvain insisted that something needed to be done. Finally, the Marseille police relented, compiled a report with Elodie's description and where she was last seen, and sent it to other police stations. The police in Aigues-Mortes continued to investigate missing persons reports, hoping to find any connection to the story Dominique Tarasco had shared 2 days earlier. When a fax arrived from the Marseille police detailing Elodie Morel's disappearance, the detectives couldn't help but feel uneasy. Elodie's last known location was Aigues-Mortes on May 2nd, and she had a meeting with an unknown individual at a bar around 6 p.m. The remarkable similarities between Elodie's disappearance and Dominique's potential abduction report couldn't be ignored. Detectives got in touch with Sylvain to gather more information about his wife. When Sylvain described the details of his wife's meeting with the photographer, they matched exactly what the police already knew from Dominique's account. These were the 2 pieces of the same story. Detectives asked Sylvain to come to the Aigues-Mortes police station and bring photos of his spouse. He also provided a description of his wife's car, the clothes she had taken with her, copies of Elodie's correspondence with Nicole Forestier, and his wife's phone number. Calls to the phone were immediately redirected to voicemail, indicating that the phone was either turned off or malfunctioning. However, the police managed to trace the ping from Elodie's phone and determined her location before her mobile went dead. On May 2nd, her phone was in Aigues-Mortes, confirming that she had safely arrived in the city on that day. Later, she was located in the commune of Saint-Gilles, which is 30 kilometers from Aigues-Mortes. This indicated that Elodie was likely on her way to the photo shoot location. Strangely, the signal then came from Vauvert, which is 19 kilometers in the opposite direction. Shortly after appearing in Vauvert, the ping from Elodie's phone disappeared and never reappeared. The police believed that they couldn't conduct a search in Aigues-Mortes, Saint-Gilles, and Vauvert all at once. The area was too extensive. Only one person could help them now, Dominique Tarasco. They asked him to come to the station. He arrived around 8:30 p.m. and shared a story with the detectives that sent shivers down their spines. It was hard for them to believe. On the evening of May 2nd, after Tarasco had called the police to report a possible abduction, he drove into town to have dinner and distract himself from his thoughts. A few hours later, he was returning home along a country road. In the darkness, he noticed flashing blue and red lights. 2 police cars were blocking the road and several officers were standing nearby. Tarasco assumed that the police were conducting a stakeout on the potential kidnapper. He stopped his car and got out to inquire about the progress of the search for the girl. Although he had not disclosed the name of the potential abductor to the detectives, Tarasco hoped that the police had located the man's car. Meanwhile, the officers observed an agitated man approaching them, waving his arms and shouting strange questions. When he got closer, they could tell that he was slightly intoxicated. The man was asking whether they had found the car, arrested the suspect, and if the girl was okay, but the police couldn't make sense of his words. They didn't understand what he was talking about because they were simply conducting a routine check on cars passing along that road. While Tarasco was talking to the police, a car slowly approached them. Dominique instantly recognized the vehicle. It was his friend's gray Citroën ZX from 1994. It was his friend's car. As the officers were preoccupied with Dominique, the car drove past the police vehicles and sped away without being stopped. Tarasco noticed his friend in the driver's seat, and a beautiful, long-haired girl was sitting in the passenger seat. She seemed to be leaning against the window as if asleep. Dominique became extremely uneasy. He began demanding that the police chase after the car and arrest the driver, but they were no longer listening to him. Suddenly, the man's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was his friend, who had just driven past him. Dominique's heart sank, but he managed to answer the call. As it turned out, his friend hadn't noticed him. Instead, he called to warn Dominique about the police presence near his home, advised him to be careful, and then ended the call. When Tarasco recounted this incredible story at the police station, the investigators were shocked. They found it hard to believe. What were the chances that Tarasco had approached the roadblock and effectively distracted the police just as his friend happened to drive by? And why was he only sharing this information now? Tarasco explained that he was terrified of his friend. With a certain degree of skepticism, the investigators contacted the officers who had been conducting the vehicle check that day and managed to confirm that there had indeed been a roadside check that evening. Someone had called Dominique after the gray Citroën ZX had passed by. Everything Tarasco had said was verified. He was telling the truth. His description of the girl in the car perfectly matched Elodie Morel. There was also no doubt about the identity of the driver of the car since Tarasco's friend had called him to warn about the police. And their patience had worn thin. They demanded a name. The investigators threatened Tarasco with imprisonment and pressed him to reveal the identity. Unable to withstand the pressure any longer, Tarasco finally gave in. Tearfully, he uttered the name of the abductor, Guillaume Mingaud. Guillaume Mingaud, 49 years old, had a long history of brushes with the law. He was known for hunting young foreign women traveling by car for his vile purposes. After his release from prison, he visited an old acquaintance and asked for a job. This acquaintance turned out to be Dominique Tarasco. Dominique had no desire to employ such a dangerous person, but fearing Mingaud himself, he hired him as a bouncer in his nightclub, where his violent nature could serve some purpose. On May 2nd, Mingaud was at Tarasco's establishment, where he boasted about having a meeting with a beautiful girl on the bar's terrace. However, Guillaume's choice of words unsettled Tarasco. Knowing Mingaud's proclivities, he felt obliged to inform the police about the impending encounter between a dangerous repeat offender and an unsuspecting girl. Learning of Mingaud's criminal history, the police immediately classified him as the prime suspect. However, the case was still based on Tarasco's vague statements and could be dismissed as a series of unlikely coincidences. Detectives needed evidence of Elodie's abduction by Guillaume Mingaud. They questioned the bar staff, who confirmed that Mingaud was a regular customer and had arrived with a beautiful girl that day. It became increasingly evident that Elodie Morel was in the hands of a very dangerous individual capable of anything. Yet, the detectives had no idea where to find the suspect. Mingaud had traveled extensively, often staying with acquaintances or spending nights in nightclubs. He could be anywhere. Therefore, they set up a trap to lure him. Detectives forced Dominique to call Mingaud and arrange a meeting. Mingaud told Dominique that he would be at a nightclub in Montpellier, a 30-minute drive from Aigues-Mortes. The club was familiar to Mingaud as he had once worked there as a bouncer. Officers positioned themselves in the club's parking lot and waited. The plan worked. A white van pulled up, and to the police's surprise, Guillaume Mingaud was indeed in the passenger seat. An unknown middle-aged man was driving, but was Elodie inside? Mingaud got out of the car and the police immediately moved to apprehend the suspect. The man tried to flee, but they quickly brought him down and arrested him. The driver of the van didn't resist. He introduced himself as Richard Lignier, a nearby resident and construction worker. He had never had any legal troubles and simply wanted to spend a pleasant evening with his acquaintance. The police searched the van, but it turned out to be empty. Elodie was not inside. Mingaud's belongings were also searched. In his pockets, they found a phone, car keys, and a wallet. Inside the wallet were some documents, a small amount of money, and a bank card in Elodie Morel's name. However, the man had a ready explanation. He claimed he had found the card on the bar's terrace 2 days ago and intended to return it to the bank the following day, but forgot to do so. As for Ligné, he explained that he lived in the commune of Vergese with his wife and teenage daughter. Mingaud had been his friend, and for the past 2 days he had been staying at his house. Mingaud allegedly often stayed with Ligné during his travels before setting out again. The detectives had a hard time believing the two men's stories. Mingaud's explanation about Elodie's bank card seemed far-fetched, and Ligné lived only 8 kilometers from Vouvray, where the last ping from Elodie's mobile phone had been recorded. The police arrested both men and took them to the station for questioning. However, they made a stop on the way, visiting Richard Ligné's home. When the officers arrived at Ligné's house, they encountered the most bizarre and surreal scene of their careers. Richard's wife, Francine Ligné, and their daughter were seated at the table, having lunch. Neither Francine nor the girl reacted to the uninvited guests at all. They continued to eat in silence, as if a group of police officers had not just burst into their home and started searching the premises. This strange reaction left the detectives astounded, as if they had been expected. An unpleasant and oppressive atmosphere pervaded the family's home. Despite this eerie atmosphere, the police meticulously searched the house while the women continued their meal. Elodie herself was nowhere to be found, but indirect evidence of her presence emerged. A black handbag, a floral dress, 2 pairs of high-heeled shoes, and a black sweater. These were the items Elodie had taken with her on her trip. However, the most crucial piece of evidence was Elodie's phone, which was now in the possession of Ligné's daughter. After making these findings, the police decided to take the mother and daughter to the station for further questioning. Interrogating Mingaud proved to be incredibly challenging. He was a master of manipulation and stuck to his story. The police could contradict some of his statements thanks to the evidence they had found, but Mingaud insisted that he had simply found the bank card and intended to return it, period. So the investigators decided to focus more on the Ligné family. They reasoned that it would be easier to get Richard, who had never been in trouble with the law before, to talk than the repeat offender Guillaume Mingaud. With each passing hour of questioning, Richard became more exhausted, and the investigators were confident that he was on the verge of revealing everything. As expected, Richard eventually broke down. He confessed that Guillaume Mingaud had shown up at his house at 6 a.m. on May 3rd while his family was having breakfast. Mingaud claimed to have come with a girl and needed somewhere to hide her. Just a few meters from Richard's house, there was an isolated place, a garage. Richard had no choice but to unlock it and allow Mingaud to drive into the garage. I didn't see what was in the trunk. I didn't hear anything. Mingaud said he would stay overnight in the garage to make sure she wouldn't scream. Richard asked no further questions, returned to the house, washed up, got dressed, and went to work as usual. But it wasn't an ordinary day. There was a young woman in his garage who could be in great danger. Richard was well aware of how cruel and dangerous Mingaud could be, but not once throughout the entire day did he feel the need to contact the police and report what was happening in his garage. After Richard's confession, his wife Francine fully corroborated his account. However, like her husband, she never considered calling the police to report the girl in her garage. She was afraid that by doing so, Mingaud would harm her daughter. She added that on the evening of the same day, May 3rd, Mingaud entered their house, demanding dinner. He had with him a black bag, a dress, 2 pairs of high-heeled shoes, a sweater, and a phone. He handed the items to Richard and Francine as a gift. Francine took the items without asking questions, while she gave the phone to their daughter, as she happened to need a new one. During lunch, Mingaud first mentioned that the girl might report him to the police and hinted at his terrible intentions toward her. Upon learning that Ligné had revealed everything to the police, Guillaume Mingaud lost confidence in himself and came up with a new version of events. He admitted to posting a fake message online about upcoming photo shoots for Rolls-Royce. He had posed as the renowned photographer Nicole Forestier and provided enough information to make the photo shoot appear credible. Mingaud claimed to be genuinely surprised when Elodie responded to the offer and accused her of falling for an offer that was too good to be true. Regardless, Mingaud contacted Elodie by phone, introduced himself as Forestier's assistant Alan Lacoste, and invited her to Aigues-Mortes ostensibly to meet Forestier before the shoot began. After meeting Elodie, he proposed going on a trip to the locations where the photo shoot was planned. She agreed and messaged her husband, assuring him that everything was fine. As he had done in the past, Mingaud drove Elodie onto a country road. Sensing that they had gone far enough, he attacked her. However, he told the police that all he needed was her bank card and PIN. He claimed that he simply let her go afterward, using her card to make some purchases, refuel his car, and withdraw some cash. This was confirmed by the ATM camera. Mingaud denied Lignier's claims about the garage and other things. Of course, no one believed that Mingaud had lured Elodie to Aigues-Mortes just to steal her bank card. While interrogating him, investigators searched Lignier's garage and found several dozen cigarette butts, fingerprints, and DNA evidence from both Guillaume and Elodie. These pieces of evidence confirmed that Elodie had been in the garage with Mingaud. Confronted with these facts, Mingaud provided yet another version of what happened. He once again claimed that he only needed Elodie's bank card. Supposedly, he did take her to the garage, but it was only to buy some time. He wanted to discuss a plan with Elodie. He would keep her bank card in exchange for her silence. Mingaud stated that he was almost ready to release her when she suddenly pushed him. He justified the subsequent violence with his explosive temper. The end of the first week of May was supposed to be the grand finale of the photo shoot for Rolls-Royce. Instead, on May 6th, Mingaud was wrapping up his statements about what had occurred. He revealed where he had left Elodie. The police found her black 1995 BMW sedan in the Aigues-Mortes parking lot. The license plates confirmed that it was her car. When detectives opened the trunk, they found Elodie there. She had died from asphyxiation. During the autopsy, more horrifying details of what had happened to Elodie during the harrowing 36 hours she spent in the clutches of her captor, with no one coming to her aid, were uncovered. There's no need to enumerate these details, as one can easily imagine what a criminal of this nature could do to an attractive young woman who had fallen into his trap. Guillaume Mangot, Richard, and Francine Lignier faced trial in January 2008. During the trial, Mingaud once again mocked the feelings of all Elodie's friends and family. Despite all the evidence gathered and his own confession, he claimed that everything was Richard Lignier's fault and that he had fallen in love with Elodie at first sight, so he allegedly couldn't harm her. No one bought into his lies, and in February 2008, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. He filed an appeal which was approved. His sentence was reduced to a maximum of 30 years with a minimum of 20 years in prison. Richard and Francine were initially sentenced to 6 years, but their prison terms were increased to 8 years after a year. Sylvain Racine struggled deeply with what happened to his wife and never publicly commented on the case. Elodie's top priority had been to raise her son in a safe and happy home environment, and Sylvain promised himself that he would do everything possible to ensure that. Dominique Tarasco, who first reported the possible kidnapping to the police, understands that his reluctance to reveal Guillaume Mingaud's name hindered the timely rescue of Elodie. He acknowledges that he still regrets not fully cooperating with the police. Dominique believes he could have saved Elodie Morel because he knew enough but didn't act on it. He has never been charged in connection with this case.
For 17 years, even the youngest residents of the French commune of Germain couldn't truly enjoy life due to the pervasive fear that gripped their families. Local resident Manon lives near the former home of the grieving family, and her parents told her about what happened when she was still a child. We walk the same streets, so, of course, we are afraid that someone might attack or abduct us, the girl says. My father always accompanied me, and now we finally know what he did, and he confessed to everything. That is somewhat comforting. For 17 whole years, it was impossible to see a child walking alone on the street. On January 9, 2003, 9-year-old Estelle Mouzin disappeared while returning home from school in her hometown of Germain, in the department of Seine-et-Marne near Paris. The girl lived with her mother Suzanne Mouzin, who was in the process of divorcing her husband and Estelle's father, Eric Mouzin. The father lived in the commune of Le Vessinet with her older brother Arthur, approximately 60 kilometers away from her mother's home. When Suzanne returned home from work at 7:30 p.m. and realized that her daughter was not there, she reported the child's disappearance to the police. In July 2003, the police began to suspect that serial killer Michel Fourniret might be involved in Estelle's disappearance because he had confessed to killing 7 people, including 3 young girls. Michel Fourniret and Monique Olivier appeared to be ordinary French retirees, he with his glasses and well-groomed hands in a professorial pose, and she, with her sunken cheeks, resembled a typical grandmother looking after her grandchildren. Behind this facade, however, lay one of France's most dangerous sexual predators, who committed his murders with the active involvement of his wife and faithful accomplice. This grey-haired couple stood alongside the most horrifying criminals in the country's history. Using her image as a happily married, respectable wife, Olivier instilled confidence in the girls that they had nothing to fear, while the poor victims were about to become the next prey of the killers. Once the girls were kidnapped, bound, and sometimes drugged, Olivier would inspect them, checking whether they were virgins, which her husband desired. The couple met after Fourniret was arrested in 1984 for sexual crimes in the Paris area and placed an advertisement in a newspaper seeking a pen pal. Michel and Monique corresponded for a long time, and then, as it turned out, Fourniret proposed to Olivier, a former caregiver, to get rid of her 2 ex-husbands who, according to Monique, had mistreated her. In exchange, she promised to find young girls for him. Fourniret never fulfilled his promise, but 2 months after his release in 1987, Olivier did what she called her first offering to her beast. Isabelle Laville was a shy 17-year-old girl who was seeing a therapist. Olivier said she chose her because she reminded her of her young self but was still an innocent girl that her husband desired. Olivier drove up to Isabelle in her car and asked for directions, convincing the girl to get in the car and show her the way. A little further down the road, Fourniret was waiting for them, pretending to be a motorist who needed help because his car broke down. Olivier stopped and allowed the man to get in. As they continued on their way, Fourniret, sitting in the back seat, strangled the girl and announced that she was now their captive. On the way back to their home, they drugged Isabelle too much. At home, Fourniret found himself unable to assault the girl, so he had sex with Monique instead, and then he killed Isabelle by strangling her. In 2006, he led the police to her remains, which were dumped in an old well. Olivier claimed she didn't know that Fourniret would kill the girl. Whatever the case, the incident seemed to solidify the relationship between the couple. In 1988, while pregnant, Olivier asked 20-year-old student Fabienne Leroy for help, saying she urgently needed to see a doctor. The sympathetic girl got into the car, and this time, Fourniret was behind the wheel. He drove the car into a field and forced the victim to get out at gunpoint. After Olivier checked the girl's virginity, Fourniret assaulted and killed Fabienne. Her body was found in a field the next day, and the couple continued to find victims and kill them following their established pattern. When their son Salem was born, the criminals didn't hesitate to use him as bait, telling girls they needed a doctor for the baby. Even if Olivier didn't always accompany her husband on his trips, he would always tell her about his exploits, claiming that he went hunting or saying, "I found satisfaction." In 2003, Fourniret made a mistake. A 13-year-old girl he abducted in Belgium managed to escape from his van when he stopped at a gas station. She chewed through the rope he used to tie her wrists. The girl was picked up by a passing motorist who noted down the van's license plate number. Fourniret was arrested, and in his car, they found several hairs, one of which belonged to Manania Thumpong, a 13-year-old girl whose remains were found in a forest in 2001. Fourniret was not eager to cooperate with the investigation, but the police from at least 5 countries, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark, began reviewing cases of violence, abductions, and murders that remained unsolved and resembled Fourniret's crimes. In Denmark, the police noticed that the composite sketch of a suspect in a violent crime closely resembled Fourniret, while in the Netherlands, Fourniret started to be suspected in the disappearance of 2 girls. In 2004, the criminal finally confessed to kidnapping and killing victims during the 1980s and 1990s, admitting to abducting 9 girls and young women during that time. He is also suspected of 10 more murders, 9 in France and 1 in Belgium. In 2006, rumors circulated that Fourniret might be the true culprit in the case of Christian Ranucci. Christian, a 20-year-old man, was beheaded by the guillotine in France on July 28, 1976, after being suspected of killing 8-year-old Marie Dolores Rambler. This case had always been highly controversial. On June 3, 1974, Marie Dolores and her brother Jean met a young man driving a car, wearing a red sweater, who claimed he was looking for his lost dog. The man had asked the children to help him, and Jean ran to search for the dog, while Marie Dolores got into the man's car and was abducted. An hour after the girl's disappearance, Christian's car, a grey Peugeot 304, was involved in an accident and left the scene. Witnesses described the driver's appearance to the police, who immediately concluded a connection between the abduction and the fleeing motorist. After a search, Marie Dolores' body was found in the bushes, where she had been strangled to death. Ranucci was arrested due to the car accident and the fact that he was allegedly carrying a heavy package. Police found trousers with dried bloodstains in his car, and the blood group on the trousers matched the girl's blood group. At first, Ranucci confessed to the murder and told the police where he had hidden the knife in the bushes. What was strange about this confession was that he only confessed to facts that the police had already established in the first 48 hours of the investigation. A day later, Ranucci denied his involvement in the crime. Allegedly, Ranucci's case was adjusted and physical evidence was hidden to match his confession. The bloodstains on the trousers turned out to be much older and were merely the result of the man falling off a motorcycle. Moreover, Ranucci had the same blood group as the girl. An elderly couple who witnessed the incident claimed to have seen the girl on the backseat of Ranucci's car and heard her screaming. However, the credibility of this statement is questionable since the couple did not leave their own car, and the door of Ranucci's car was broken from the side opposite to where the pensioners claimed he had taken the girl out. Later, 5 more people claimed to have witnessed the abduction, and all of them described a man who looked nothing like Ranucci. 2 interesting points are worth noting. Firstly, Fourniret also drove a grey Peugeot 304, which from behind resembled a Simca 1100, a car described by 2 witnesses as the one the driver used to lure children inside on the day of Marie Dolores' abduction. The driver was wearing a red sweater, which was later found by investigators. As it turned out, the sweater found at the crime scene did not belong to Ranucci, as several sizes too small for an athletic-looking young man like him. Secondly, the most surprising discovery was a photograph taken by a photographer from a Marseille newspaper in March 1976 in the courtroom during Ranucci's trial. Among the visitors, there sat a man with glasses who suspiciously resembled Fourniret. Although the fact that Fourniret attended the trial was refuted, it is hard to deny that he is a much more suitable suspect in this case. For example, he went on vacation to Marseille in June 1974, driving a car of the same grey colour and brand. At that time, he was 32 years old and, compared to Ranucci, already had a history of sexual crimes. Fourniret also frequently used the lost dog trick to lure young girls into his car. Additionally, no signs of violence were found on the child's body. Unfortunately for Ranucci, the media frenzy around the girl's murder made him a suspect even before the case went to trial. Immediately after his arrest, the press labeled him as the killer, and he was sentenced to death, becoming one of the last people executed in France. Why did the police begin to suspect that Michel Fourniret might be connected to the disappearance of Estelle Mouzin? 2 weeks before Estelle's disappearance, a 9-year-old girl was almost kidnapped by a man in a white van. The girl was able to describe the driver to the police, which led to the creation of a composite sketch of the suspect. When the police focused their efforts on Ray, who also drove a white van, they showed the girl a photo of him, hoping she would recognize him, but she didn't. Additionally, after his confession to the murders, Ray led the police to the burial site of one of his young victims. On the way there, he described the clothing the girl was wearing on the day of her abduction, which was similar to what Estelle was wearing on the day she disappeared, although the police believe this might be a mere coincidence. Sometime later, the police found photos of Estelle and recordings of television programs about the girl in Ray's house and on his computer. It's worth noting that 2 fragments of white shoelaces and black gloves were found with Ray, and Estelle was wearing white shoes and black gloves on the day of her disappearance. However, the police couldn't find any additional connections between the serial killer and the crime, and the hypothesis of Ray's involvement had to be discarded due to a lack of evidence. Moreover, he had an alibi. He claimed he made a phone call to his son from his home on the day the girl disappeared. Although there was no certainty that Ray actually made that call, the police believed he was not lying. Psychologists were also confident that Ray was not involved in the case because Estelle was too young for him. The 3 girls he confessed to murdering were 12 and 13 years old. His accomplice and wife, Monique Olivier, told the police that once when they were watching a TV program accusing Ray of killing Estelle, he laughed and said it wasn't him. In May 2010, the Mouzin family's lawyer requested a new investigation into Ray's involvement. In 2013, he was declared innocent after several hair analyses from his van, conducted when he was arrested in 2003, did not match Estelle's DNA. As for the second suspect in Estelle Mouzin's kidnapping, Nordal Lelandaise, the police were interested in him in connection with 3 different crimes. He was the main suspect in the murder of Arthur Noyer, a soldier who disappeared in April and whose skull was found in September. He was also the main suspect in the case of the disappearance of Maelys de Araujo, a 9-year-old girl who was kidnapped from a wedding on August 27, 2017. 9-year-old Maelys de Araujo was last seen on the night of August 27, 2017, at a wedding to which she was invited with her parents. At the event, the children were playing separately from the adult celebration. Around 3 a.m., her absence was noticed, and her search began initially without police involvement. A witness at the wedding recalled, the DJ of the evening announced over the microphone that a child was missing. Suddenly, everyone started searching in the main hall and outside. It was terrible. To witness the disappearance of a 9-year-old girl, it's very serious. At first, we thought she fell asleep somewhere after playing hide and seek. An hour later, when she wasn't found, the police were called. The arriving police initiated the search for the child using search dogs and also explored the area with helicopters. All 180 guests invited to the wedding were interviewed. Almost immediately, investigators noticed inconsistencies in the statements of Nordal Lelandaise, a friend of the groom. A week into the investigation, after crime scene analysts found DNA belonging to the girl on the dashboard of Lelandaise's car, he was charged with her kidnapping. From that moment, Lelandaise remained silent, refusing to assist the investigation, and claimed that even though the girl might have been in his car, it didn't prove his guilt. As the police conducted their investigation into the child's disappearance, they discovered other clues pointing to Lelandaise's involvement. In particular, a surveillance camera captured a car belonging to the man leaving the wedding venue with a small figure on the passenger seat shortly before the girl's disappearance was reported. The blurry silhouette was wearing a white dress, similar to what Maelys was wearing. The parents recognized elements of the dress, especially the child's ribbon, said their lawyer, Fabian Rajon. Additionally, Lelandaise's phone was in airplane mode around the time of the girl's disappearance, and it turned back on 39 minutes later when he returned to the celebration alone. It was also established that the next day, Lelandaise spent several hours cleaning his car with powerful cleaning products. He claimed he did it to prepare the car for sale. Lelandaise's defense initially disputed the timeline provided by the prosecution. His lawyer confirmed that while traces of the girl's DNA were found on his car's dashboard, his client completely denied kidnapping her. He stated that several DNA traces were found on the dashboard, and someone who had contact with the child could have transferred her DNA into the car. He also speculated that children could have gotten into the car without the driver's knowledge, noting that the windows were opened during the celebration. After 6 months of investigation, Leland Days was forced to change his statements when Maelys' blood was found in the trunk of his car. He confessed to killing the girl and apologized to her parents. Earlier, he had admitted that she was in his car on the night of her disappearance but claimed not to know anything about her subsequent fate. Now, he admitted that he unintentionally killed the child. The prosecutor from Grenoble, Jean-Yves Coquelet, stated that Leland Days led investigators to the location near his parents' home in Domessine, Savoie Department, where the body was found. The search for the remains of the young girl took an entire day and was complicated by snow and rough terrain. Some of the girl's remains were found by the investigators and search dogs. The prosecutor from Grenoble said that Maelys' parents are no longer in the dark, adding that they know their daughter is dead, that she was killed, and that a few minutes ago they were told that the child's remains were found. This is a horrific conclusion to the case, the culmination of 6 months of investigation and search, he added. The girl's mother addressed Leland Days through a Facebook message. We had to wait 5.5 months for this monster to finally speak. Maelys will haunt you day and night in your cell, she wrote, grieving. My little angel, I couldn't protect you from this predator, and I will blame myself for that for a long time. Nordal Leland Days, a former military dog handler who was also charged with the murder of a young soldier, claims that he killed Maelys de Araujo by mistake but refused to provide details of what happened. Post-mortem examination showed that the girl had a broken jaw, likely from a strong blow to the face. The prosecutors handling Maelys' case suspect Leland Days to be a serial killer. On December 21, 2017, he was charged with the murder of Arthur Noyer, a 23-year-old soldier who disappeared without a trace during a hike on April 12, 2017. The soldier's relatives admitted that they also hoped to learn the truth about his death. Arthur was last seen early in the morning on April 12, 2017, as he left a nightclub to go on a hike in Chambéry. Pieces of his skull were found on a hiking trail in the municipality of Montmelian, near Chambéry, in September. The phone company recorded Leland Days' phone in the same area at the time of the soldier's disappearance. Leland Days' Audi A3 was also spotted by surveillance cameras in the Chambéry area. During the investigation, police also searched his computer and phone, and it was revealed that 2 weeks after the soldier's disappearance, Leland Days entered the search query human body dismemberment. Over time, Leland Days confessed to investigators that he gave the soldier a ride but denied any involvement in his death before finally admitting to the murder on March 29, 2018. There are also suspicions that Leland Days may be responsible for the unsolved murder of 3 people in the Alps when a British man, his wife, and his mother-in-law were killed in a car park in a wooded area in September 2012. Other cases in which Leland Days may be involved include the disappearance of Adrien Morel, a 24-year-old Belgian man who went missing near Lake Annecy in July, and Jean-Christophe Morin and Ahmed Hamad, who disappeared in 2011 and 2012, respectively. Leland Days' alleged connections to these murders led the police to start reviewing other cases of missing people in the region as they feared he might be a serial killer. The police investigated his possible involvement in at least 10 other crimes. While investigating other potential crimes, Leland Days' connection to the case of Estelle Mouzin came to light. Maelys' disappearance bore similarities to Estelle's case, as the girls were about the same age, and both vanished without a trace, with no witnesses to the abductions. Recognizing this similarity, Estelle's family requested to determine Leland Days' whereabouts at the time of their daughter's disappearance. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, it turned out that he was serving in the military in the Marne department, 150 kilometers away from where Estelle disappeared. Thus, law enforcement had to dismiss him as a second prospective suspect in Estelle Mouzin's abduction case. Over the course of several years while the search for Estelle was ongoing, other potential leads were discovered, which ultimately led nowhere. For instance, a real shock for the girl's family was the appearance of a photo allegedly of Estelle, which was taken from a website containing indecent images of children. Her father confessed how upset he was by the appearance of such a photo, but it turned out not to be his daughter. The girl in the photo appeared older than Estelle, and the image was taken several years before her disappearance. The police had no new leads, and the chances of finding Estelle were diminishing before their eyes. But then thunder struck on January 24, 2020, when Monique Olivier, the former wife of Michel Fourniret, claimed that her ex-husband killed Estelle Mouzin. On March 6, 2020, her statements were confirmed by Michel Fourniret himself. For years, Michel Fourniret denied any involvement in the girl's disappearance. However, 16.5 years later, on November 27, 2019, Michel Fourniret, a serial killer and predator of minors who was already serving a life sentence, became the primary suspect once again. He was charged with abduction and forced confinement, which ended in death. On January 24, 2020, Monique Olivier confirmed to Judge Sabine Keris that it was indeed her who made the phone call from their home to Fourniret's son on January 9, 2003, the day of the girl's disappearance. Not stopping there, she continued to narrate that the girl represented the type of victim her husband was seeking, and she was not too young for him, as psychologists once claimed. She admitted that a few days before the abduction, her husband had been driving around the region and returned one evening, announcing that he had spotted a beautiful little target, as he put it. Responding to questions from the investigating judge after his alibi collapsed due to his former wife's confession, Fourniret finally confirmed that he abducted and killed the girl. However, the elderly Fourniret claimed during the hearing that he suffers from memory loss and was not formally charged. "It is very likely, even very, very likely, that I was the author of that disappearance," Fourniret said, asserting that nothing clicked in his head when he was shown a picture of the girl. "Since I cannot say for sure that I am responsible for her disappearance, I call on you to consider me as guilty," he added. Fourniret, 78 years old according to media reports, is suffering from the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, experiencing moments of absence, but has generally understood everything, according to Didier Sabin, the lawyer of Estelle's father. To corroborate Fourniret's statements, Monique Olivier was questioned again, and she confirmed that her husband did indeed abduct and kill Estelle Mouzin. Although Fourniret confessed to the girl's murder, he refused or was unable to reveal the location where he hid her body. He only mentioned that she might be on the property of one of his houses in the Ardennes. Forensics began the grim search for the girl's remains on Monday, June 22, 2020. Experts sealed off Fourniret's former home in northern France, more than 200 kilometers from where Estelle was abducted on her way home from school. The police also cordoned off another former residence of Fourniret in Château de Sautou, where the remains of other victims of the killer, a 12-year-old girl and a 22-year-old woman, were found in 2004. Unfortunately, they did not find Estelle's body. "We can report some progress, but some doors have been closed forever, places we can now discard," said one of the lawyers representing the Mouzin family. Even before Fourniret's confession to Estelle's murder, the serial killer, nicknamed the Monster of the Ardennes, as well as the Virginity Hunter, had been sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His accomplice, Monique Olivier, also received a life sentence with the possibility of parole only after 28 years. Such a case has never occurred with investigators from South Dakota. There are 3 suspects, the husband, the lover, and the 12-year-old daughter, each with a motive for committing a heinous crime, but only one of them is guilty. Will the detectives be able to uncover the truth, navigating through the depths of anonymous letters, spy devices, and false evidence amidst the ocean of passions that unfolded around what seemed to be an ordinary American family? On the morning of Wednesday, February 8, 2006, Wyoming resident Bonnie Burns was sitting by the phone, eagerly awaiting a call from her daughter, 41-year-old Tammy Ria, who lived in Pierre, South Dakota. Every morning for many years, Tammy would call Bonnie without fail. The sudden silence from her daughter frightened Bonnie, so she decided to call herself. Tammy's home phone went unanswered, and her mobile phone redirected the call to voicemail. She was also absent from her job in the shoe department at Kmart. Contemplating what to do next, Bonnie recalled the name of one of her daughter's colleagues, Brian. Tammy had recently mentioned to the family that she had been communicating with Brian frequently. Therefore, Bonnie dialed the store number again, this time inquiring if Brian was present. Brian Clark answered Bonnie's call in surprise. He also didn't know where Tammy was. However, in response to Bonnie's desire to contact the police, he asked her to provide him with the details. He dialed 911 and reported that he needed to report a missing person. Brian added that a crime may have occurred. When asked by the dispatcher why he believed so, he replied that he and Tammy were having an affair, and it was evident that her husband had found out about it. When 12-year-old Elodie Ria sat down to have breakfast, she immediately felt that something was off. Her father, Brad Ria, was also seated at the table, but her mother was nowhere to be found. Tammy always busied herself in the kitchen, but now the house was unusually quiet. Elodie walked into her mother's bedroom. All her belongings were still there. Her SUV was parked in the garage. The girl couldn't understand what was happening. Her mother couldn't have left without her purse, phone, or keys. They had spent the evening together, while her father, as usual, worked late, and her mother never once mentioned that she had plans in the morning. Perplexed about where she could be, Elodie asked her father. In a hushed voice, Brad replied, "Sweetheart, she's probably with her boyfriend. She'll be back in 2 days." Tammy and Brad met in Billings, Montana. The young couple started dating right away, and within a year, Tammy was expecting a child. It was her dream to get married and become a mother. Tammy took care of Elodie and the household while Brad focused on his career. In 2004, Brad's hard work paid off when he was offered a promotion to assistant manager at Walmart, but it required the family to relocate to Pierre. Although it was the administrative center of South Dakota, the town had less than 14,000 residents and lacked any significant entertainment options. One notable attraction in Pierre was the dam and the adjacent lake, a popular spot for fishing and hunting. However, it provided a picturesque and peaceful setting for the family, so Brad accepted the offer. The move from a big city wasn't easy for the family, but after some time, life in the new place began to settle. Hay found a few sports clubs to join, and Tammy found work at a store where she met Brian Clark. Unlike her husband, who loved his wife but couldn't devote enough attention due to work, Brian was always there for her. The news of her mother having a boyfriend came as a thunderbolt out of the blue for Elodie. Although her parents had informed her 2 weeks earlier that they had decided to get divorced, this news caught her completely off guard. Her parents had explained to her that her father had been working incredibly long hours, sometimes up to 100 hours a week, and it had taken a toll on their marriage. However, they had promised to stay together until the end of the school year so that the changes wouldn't affect Elodie's education. And now, with her father announcing that her mother had a boyfriend, Elodie didn't know what to think. After dropping his daughter off at school, Brad headed to work. As soon as he entered, 2 police officers approached him. When Brad heard that his wife had gone missing, he was shocked. He explained that he hadn't seen Tammy since the previous day. When he arrived home from work after 10 p.m., his daughter was already asleep and Tammy wasn't home. Around 1 a.m., Brad heard a car screech to a halt outside. He glanced out the window and saw Tammy park her black SUV, get into another car, and drive away with a man. Brad had recently discovered that his wife was seeing someone else and assumed it was his car. Succumbing to a sudden impulse, he got into Tammy's SUV and followed them. But soon his wife's car broke down and Brad had to pull over on the side of the road. A passing patrol officer stopped to assist Brad. By the time the car started again, he had lost sight of his wife, so he returned home and went to sleep. The next morning, she was still missing, and he assumed she had gone somewhere with the other man. The detectives listened attentively to Brad's account of the events from the previous night. The store manager, a man of small stature and meek appearance, didn't seem like a threatening individual, and his behavior didn't indicate any signs of lying. The police asked if Tammy could have already returned home, and Brad willingly agreed to accompany them. It was a trick. The officers had already been inside the house, and one of them noticed something through the garage window that caught his attention. When Brad allowed them to search his home, one officer went inside while the other headed straight to the garage. There, he noticed a reddish-brown stain on Tammy's car door. As he approached, he saw blood dripping from the vehicle's threshold. There was too much of it, and when the police officer opened the door, he was nearly overwhelmed by the powerful smell of bleach. Everything indicated a crime, but the officers didn't want to alarm Brad, who could demand the search to stop at any moment. The police decided to employ another trick. They asked Brad to drive with them to the station to answer some questions. And while the owner was not at home, they would request an official search warrant. Simultaneously, during the questioning of Brad, the police spoke with Haley. The girl shared that her parents never argued, and her father devoted every spare moment to the family. That's why the news of their divorce was such a surprise. Haley noticed that the impending divorce had also taken a toll on her father. He had been very moody in recent days, hardly eating anything, and he had called Tammy, pleading for her help in saving their marriage. Meanwhile, Haley's mother had behaved as usual. Tammy told her family that the house would stay with her and Haley, and Brad would move out. The family confirmed the girl's words. Tammy was looking forward to the divorce. She informed her relatives that the house would remain with her and Haley, and Brad would relocate. At the police station, Brad cooperated fully, answering all the questions. His wife had recently confessed to him that she had fallen in love with someone else and wanted a divorce, but Brad didn't know who the other person was. He adamantly denied any involvement in Tammy's disappearance and insisted that he had no idea where she might be. When the detectives informed him about the blood found on the car, he was shocked. While Brad was being questioned, the police obtained a search warrant for his home and thoroughly examined every room, but everything seemed completely normal except for the blood in Tammy's car. It was a cozy home of an ordinary family. The amount of blood found in Tammy's SUV indicated that she had suffered serious harm and was likely killed. In such a case, Brad was the most likely suspect, given his wife's desire for a divorce, which provided a motive. They interrogated him for 5 hours until he insisted on having a lawyer. Although they weren't 100% certain that Tammy had been killed, they couldn't release the suspect either, as he could potentially destroy any evidence. The police had no choice but to arrest Brad on the first-degree murder charge. While Brad Ria was under arrest, the investigators invited Brian Clark to the police station. He arrived with his lawyer. Just like Tammy, Brian also had a family, a wife and a daughter. Brian told the detectives that he had last seen Tammy the day before her disappearance. They met at a motel, and then Brian dropped Tammy off at her home around 5 p.m. afterward. He went to a basketball game with his wife and daughter. He spent the entire evening and the night at home. Brian mentioned that his wife could confirm his alibi, but she was unaware of his affair with Tammy, and he preferred it to stay that way. Once again, the detectives didn't know what to think. The man genuinely seemed concerned about Tammy, but the fact that he immediately appeared with a lawyer raised suspicions. Additionally, the fact that Brian's wife was unaware of her husband's infidelity provided him with a motive for murder. Perhaps, if Tammy had confessed to Brian, she demanded that her lover do the same, urging him to get a divorce or even threatening to talk to Brian's wife, pushing him over the edge. Access to Tammy's SUV was in the hands of her husband, but if his story about surveilling his wife was true, Brian could have killed Tammy and doused the car in blood to frame her husband. The police tracked down the patrol officer who had stopped to help Brad start his car, and he confirmed Brad's account word for word. Now, the police had confirmation of the story he had consistently repeated. So, who was the killer if the murder indeed took place?
No matter how you look at it, without a body, the case couldn't progress any further. On February 9th, search teams began combing the extensive area around the city, where rarely anyone could be found except for hunters who frequented the hilly shores from October to January. If Tammy was here, it was unlikely that anyone would stumble upon her before the start of the next hunting season, 8 months later. By that time, wild animals would most likely have discovered her remains first. The teams covered kilometer after kilometer, but the woman was nowhere to be found. As the sun approached the horizon, the helicopter pilot decided to fly over the isolated plain, approximately 16 kilometers north of the city, one more time. While flying over the marshland near the dam, he spotted Tammy Ria's lifeless body. As it turned out, the woman had been stabbed at least 35 times. It felt as if the killer had unleashed immense fury upon her. It was an extremely brutal murder, but there was no blood around the body, indicating that the attack had taken place elsewhere. The officers found a t-shirt and 2 blood-stained gloves, but there was nothing that could provide clues to the identity of the killer. Neither the autopsy nor another search of the family's home yielded any results. The investigators had no choice but to interrogate Brian's wife. It presented an excellent opportunity for the betrayed woman to seek revenge, but she didn't take advantage of it. She confirmed that her husband was at home on the night of February 7th. However, despite the couple sleeping in the same bedroom, the woman suffered from back pain and often spent the night downstairs in a reclining chair. That was the case on the night of Tammy's murder. Therefore, Brian could have slipped out of the house in the middle of the night without his wife knowing. Once again, the investigation reached a dead end. Suddenly, the case took a completely unexpected turn. A letter was delivered to the office of the district attorney. It was written by one of Brian Clark's cousins. The man could no longer stay silent and wanted to unburden himself. According to the letter, Brian confessed that on Tuesday, February 7th, he met with Tammy at the motel and they agreed to meet again later. Brian arrived at Tammy's house late at night. They took 2 blankets and set off in Tammy's SUV out of town. After spreading the blankets, Tammy undressed, leaving only her t-shirt, and asked Brian to wear a condom, but he refused. Tammy's persistence infuriated him. He attacked her, and they struggled for some time before Brian forcefully got what he wanted. However, during the assault, the condom remained inside Tammy's body. In a fit of rage, Brian grabbed a knife and attacked Tammy. After killing her, he wrapped her body in the blankets and placed it in the SUV. He then returned home and parked the car in the garage. Brian had to share everything with his brother, who helped him get rid of the evidence. Many of the facts listed in the letter were not known to the public. The anonymous author could only have learned them from the killer. But there was one hitch. The initial autopsy did not reveal any condom. To uncover the truth, another autopsy was conducted. Incredibly, upon re-examining the body, the pathologist discovered this crucial piece of evidence that had somehow been missed the first time. The discovery promised to provide the much-awaited clue that the investigators were hoping for. However, due to the time the condom had spent inside Tammy's body, the DNA sample could not be used for comparison. What seemed like a promising piece of evidence raised even more questions. Whoever wrote the letter undoubtedly knew all the information about the murder, but there was still no physical evidence proving that Brian was the killer. Now the investigators understood what Brad was talking about during his initial interrogation. Even when it was unknown whether Tammy was killed, he had said, "All this evidence points to me, but I hope there will be a body because there will be something that will exonerate me. Maybe DNA, something like that." Brad could only hope for such evidence if he himself planted it in an attempt to frame Brian. The question was, how did he obtain Brian's DNA? The investigators talked to Brian and learned that he often disposed of used condoms by throwing them out of the car window. It turned out that Brad had followed multiple lovers before. By tracking them, he discovered Brian's habit, which allowed him to devise a cunning plan to frame his rival. Of course,
Brad couldn't have known that DNA would not be suitable for analysis if it remained in another person's body for a long time. The biggest problem remained that the investigators still didn't know where the murder took place. The police returned to the family's house for another search, hoping to find the slightest clue. In Brad's closet, an officer found something intriguing, a tiny digital recorder. When the detectives pressed the playback button, Tammy's voice filled the room. She asked to call Brian Clark. They spoke for a few minutes, and then Tammy said, "I love you very, very much." Since the beginning of the investigation, Brad had claimed that he didn't know who Tammy was seeing. But on the recording, Brian's name was clearly heard. Brad had set a trap to find out who his wife was meeting. He had placed the recorder in her car, along with a bouquet and a note. As Brad had hoped, Tammy assumed the flowers were from her lover and called Brian to thank him, inadvertently revealing his identity. Now the police wanted to know what else Brad might have been lying about and how he managed to send an anonymous letter while being in prison. Brad regularly communicated with his twin brother, Brett Ria. When Brett was released from prison after a visit to his brother, the police were already following him. Upon his arrest, they discovered a very interesting notepad in his possession. It listed all the facts that later appeared in the anonymous letter. Additionally, they found a letter from Brad describing excellent fishing spots. He drew a map indicating several locations near the dam. Considering the murder charges against him, it was unlikely that he would be thinking about something as trivial as fishing. The marked locations were significant for another reason. Following the instructions, the officers found 3 large black garbage bags containing blood-soaked beddings. The bags also contained blood-stained rubber gloves, women's underwear, and a large tarp. The tarp explained why there was no trace of blood in the Ria family's house. Here's how events likely unfolded on that night. Brad had prearranged the tarp on Tammy's mattress and placed several sheets over it to ensure she wouldn't notice anything. When she lay down on the bed on the night of February 7th, Brad entered the room and attacked her, stabbing her multiple times through the sheets and slashing her throat. The bedding immediately absorbed all the blood. Brad then carried Tammy's wrapped body, along with the sheets, to the garage, located right next to her bedroom. He placed her body in the car, planted the evidence, and loaded her body and the bags of bedding. As for Brad's story about breaking down on the road and interacting with the patrol officer, he was likely on the verge of getting caught. He was heading to Brian's house, intending to plant some evidence, confident that the condom would lead investigators to his rival. And when he realized that he wasn't discovered during the autopsy, he had to devise a plan involving the letter with a false confession and seek his brother's help to send it. The trial began in January 2007. Since the prosecutor did not seek the death penalty for Brad, in the event of a guilty verdict under South Dakota law, he would automatically receive a life sentence. The prosecutor expected the process to be brief and clear-cut, but Brad made the rare decision for a defendant to testify in his own defense. No one could have anticipated what he would say when he took the witness stand. Unable to hide the lie any longer, Brad felt that he had to confess everything. It was not him who killed Tammy, but his now 13-year-old daughter, Haley. Problems started after Haley was informed that her parents were getting divorced. She was furious because her parents didn't want to reconcile and spent whole days in a saddened state. On the night of February 7th, Brad returned late from work, and his wife and daughter were already asleep. He also went to bed but was awakened by the cat around midnight. Brad heard some noise coming from Tammy's room and went to check what was happening. To his horror, he saw Haley standing over her mother's body. She was covered in blood and holding a knife. There was blood coming from her nose, indicating that Tammy must have fought back. Brad shouted, asking Haley what she had done, but she stood motionless and didn't respond. Brad attempted to help his wife but realized it was futile. His daughter continued to stand there, showing no emotions. It was only then that Brad realized she was asleep. In panic, he took the girl back to her room and wiped off all the blood. He then tried to clean the crime scene. He put the clothes in the washing machine and took his wife to the car. To protect his daughter, he decided to frame a man whom Tammy had seen. When Haley woke up the next day, she behaved completely normally, and Brad realized that she didn't remember anything that had happened. Initially, he wanted to escape to Mexico with his daughter, but he was arrested before he could do so. Brad explained that his daughter always had behavioral problems and had even stabbed her stuffed toys when she was a little child. He admitted that he had broken the law and deserved punishment, but only for trying to protect his child. The prosecutor was pleased that Brad provided testimony because attempting to accuse his daughter would have enraged the jury members. In reality, the evidence indicated that the wounds on Tammy's body could not have been inflicted by a 12-year-old girl, even considering that she was a fairly strong volleyball player. During the cross-examination, the defendant couldn't explain facts that had already been reliably established. Moreover, Brad's twin brother had already confessed to everything. It took the jury 3 hours to deliver a guilty verdict. Nevertheless, Brad Ria insists on his story. He unsuccessfully filed an appeal, claiming that he was framed by investigators and that his daughter's DNA was never compared to the DNA at the crime scene. The most terrifying part is that if a condom with Brian Clark's DNA had been found during the initial autopsy, this case could have ended completely differently. The fact that the intended evidence was not found compelled Brad to bury himself deeper, acting out of desperation. Haley Ria lost both of her parents on the day her father decided to kill her mother. She moved to live with relatives in Wyoming and never saw Brad again. Fortunately, she didn't allow the incident to break her. The immense love that surrounded her mother became a source of motivation for the girl. Speaking out on public platforms, she became the voice of domestic violence victims who can no longer stand up for themselves. Haley pursued an education in criminal law, got married, became a mother, and only regrets that her son will never know what a wonderful, kind, and loving person his grandmother was. Christie Marceau woke up from a sudden phone call. The girl was sleeping in her room. It was 10 a.m. on Tuesday, September 6, 2011, and the 18-year-old student from the University of Technology in Auckland, New Zealand, didn't need to get up early. The phone stopped ringing before Christie picked up the receiver. But then, a few seconds later, it rang again. The girl answered. A male voice on the other end of the line asked to speak to Christie. "This is Christie," the girl said. It turned out that the caller was her acquaintance, Akshay-chan. Until recently, they both worked at a local supermarket. They weren't friends, but they sometimes talked at work and outside of it, exchanging messages on Facebook. They lived just a few blocks apart, and Akshay had come to Christie's house a few times. He often needed someone to talk to about his personal problems. Kind and compassionate, Christie was always ready to listen to him. The girl knew that Akshay had been going through a tough time lately, but she couldn't imagine what he would say next. Her heart sank when he uttered, "I dissolved 40 tablets in a drink, and if you don't come to my house within 10 minutes, I will drink it." Without a second thought, the girl hurried to help Akshay. Christie was in such a rush after Akshay's call that she had hardly any time to get dressed. She quickly put on sweatpants and a sweater over her sleepwear, grabbed her keys and mobile phone, jumped into her car, and drove about a kilometer to Akshay's house. It was unusual for Christie to ignore a cry for help. She always tried to assist those who had a harder time in life. Unlike the sociable Christie, Akshay-chan didn't have many friends. Everyone recognized his extraordinary intellect, but he found it difficult to communicate with other kids, especially girls. When fate brought them together at work in a local supermarket, Akshay began sharing his inner struggles with her. The girl sympathized with him, but in June 2011, she started a new job and saw Akshay much less frequently. By the time he called her on September 6th, a considerable amount of time had passed since their last meeting. Christie had only 2 minutes to arrive at the apartment building where the guy lived with his mother and younger sister. She parked her car, rushed up the stairs, and knocked on the door. Akshay let her inside. Christie followed him through the entrance door, which he locked behind them. There was no one else at home. Akshay's mother was at work and his 16-year-old sister was at school. As Christie sat down in a chair opposite him, she noticed a small amount of white powder on the table. It looked like someone had crushed tablets. Obviously, Chand hadn't lied when he mentioned the glass with the medication. Christie asked him where the drink was. "Do you think I'm that stupid?" He replied, "Of course, I hid it because I knew you would find it." Concerned, the girl tried to persuade Akshay to seek professional help. Her words disappointed him. From his perspective, Christie wasn't helping him cope with depression after she left the supermarket. Christie explained that she was torn between her university studies and her new job. But Chand argued that she could spare 5 minutes to chat with him on Facebook, and that would be enough. Then he added, "Let's face it, you weren't that busy." Christie became increasingly uneasy. The more he blamed her, the more she explained that she couldn't help him. He needed to reach out to a specialist. This angered Akshay even more. He jumped out of his chair and reached into his pocket for a kitchen knife. The knife was long and very sharp. Akshay held onto the handle tightly, brandishing it in front of Christie. "This is how we're going to do it," he said. "If you scream, I'll stab you with the knife." Christie began whimpering in response, prompting Chand to order her to be quiet and calm down. The girl still held onto her mobile phone, contemplating how to send a message to her friend asking for help. But Chand noticed the phone and demanded that she hand it over. Christie clung to her phone tightly, as if it were her only connection to the outside world. Failing to forcefully take the phone from her, Chand threatened the girl again, implying he would resort to using the weapon. He snatched the girl's mobile phone, and suddenly, Chand began to talk. He declared that he had big plans for the day. He decided to scare the girl, seek revenge on her for not supporting him during his most difficult period, and finally put an end to everything in one fell swoop. Then he demanded that Christie take off her sweater and hand it over to him. After searching through it, he demanded her blue top. The girl refused, but predictably, the guy threatened her with the knife. Christie complied. Then he ordered her to stand up and show that she wasn't hiding anything in her pants. She emptied her pockets, but it wasn't enough for him, and he wanted her to remove the sweatpants she was wearing. Christie refused and broke down in even greater tears. But realizing that she had no choice, she undressed, leaving herself only in her underwear. Chand crumpled her clothes into a pile, sat back in the chair, and began rambling about various things. He spouted nonsense about how people like Christie make others suffer. He accused her of coming to him only when it was already too late. Overall, more time had passed since Christie arrived at his place. Terrified, she asked if he planned to kill her. Chand reminded her of his plans for the day, to frighten her, seek revenge, and drink the prepared drink. He hadn't previously specified how he planned to seek revenge, but now he was ready to tell her. Akshay Chand wanted to violate Christie. Upon hearing this, the girl burst into tears, which prompted Chand to ask her to calm down. Then, out of the blue, he changed his mind. He returned Christie's clothes, phone, and told her she could leave. Still overwhelmed with fear, Christie initially didn't believe the sudden change in the guy's mood. What if he planned to stab her in the back, catching her off guard when she turned away? She shared her concerns with Chand, forcing him to lower the knife. "I'm letting you go, but you should know that as soon as you leave, I will drink the concoction," he said. Christie once again tried to persuade him to abandon this plan. Despite what he had put her through, her character didn't allow her to leave after such words. But Chand insisted. Too frightened to linger any longer, Christie turned around and ran out of the apartment. She hurried down the stairs to her car. Passers-by walked by, unaware of what had just happened to her. Christie wanted to ask one of them for help, but she realized she wouldn't feel safe until she reached home. Getting into her car, Christie locked the doors, started the engine, and drove home. From the perspective of Christie's parents, Brian and Tracy Marceau, she was their little miracle. After the birth of their first child, a girl named Heather, Tracy and Brian Massor had been trying to become parents again. However, it took 6 years before Christie was born. By 2011, the very close-knit family members were living far apart. Heather had moved out of the family home a few years ago, and Brian was working in Australia. Tracy was planning to move to Australia soon to be closer to her husband. Christie was also looking forward to the move. As her first year at the University of Auckland's School of Hospitality and Tourism approached its end, where she was studying event management, she could continue her education in Australia. By the age of 30, the young woman dreamed of starting her own event planning company. Currently, she still lived in her parents' home, where she grew up in the suburb of Hillcrest. On the morning of the attack on Christie, Tracy was at work when her phone rang around 11:30 a.m. It was her mother, Shirley, who lived together with Tracy and Christie in the same house. Tracy answered, and in the background, she heard Christie's hysterical crying. Then she heard her mother's voice, telling her to come home immediately because Christie had been attacked. Tracy arrived home within 15 minutes. Upon seeing her mother, Christie threw herself into her arms and didn't want to let go. Trembling and crying incessantly, she recounted what Akshay Chand had done to her. Tracy hardly knew Akshay, but she remembered that once, while seeing off Brian at the airport, they returned home with their daughter and found him waiting at the doorstep. Akshay and Christie chatted briefly. Christie assured her mother that she just needed someone to talk to, but Tracy didn't like him right away. He evoked a strange feeling in her, and she asked her daughter to stop communicating with him. However, the girl was confident that there was nothing to worry about, and Tracy had never heard of Akshay again until this incident. Shocked by the details of what had happened, Tracy immediately took her daughter to the police station. In the police station, Christie repeated her account of the attack. She didn't know why Akshay had a change of heart and let her go, but she was certain that it wasn't the end and that he would attack her again because he had been stalking her for some time. She didn't tell her parents that she had found him sitting on the steps of her house on more than one occasion. At one point, he left a note for her in the mailbox, confessing his love and thanking her for the support she had provided, which he desperately needed. Chand also insisted that Christie accept a large sum of money as a gift. She took the money but didn't spend it, believing that he would demand it back. And indeed, a few days later, he did. When she left work at the supermarket, Chand quit his job on the same day, stating that he had no reason to stay there without her. After that, their communication ceased, and it became evident that Akshay had built up a lot of anger towards Christie, believing that she had abandoned him. The thought of him being out there frightened her, and the police recognized the danger she faced. As a result, Akshay Chand was promptly placed under arrest. Akshay admitted to everything and stated that the drink he threatened to consume contained multivitamins. However, he genuinely believed that consuming them in large quantities was toxic. In the police station, he calmly explained that his motive was revenge. Chand was angry at Christie because she didn't help him with his depression, and he openly expressed that he still harbored thoughts of vengeance. The police were extremely concerned about his behavior. It was a significant leap from someone who had never had any issues with the law to a criminal charged with abduction, attempted sexual assault, and threats of harm. Since he was still angry at Christie, the detectives knew it was crucial to keep Chand in custody until he could appear in court. They prepared a document outlining the reasons why Chand should not be released on bail, emphasizing Christie's fear and the proximity of their homes. They highlighted the fact that he could appear at her doorstep within minutes if he desired. 3 days after the attack, Akshay appeared in court. His lawyer argued that her client should be released on bail because he was only 18 years old. According to the law at that time, individuals over 17 but under 20 years old were typically eligible for bail if they had no prior convictions. Since Chand had never been arrested before, his lawyer claimed that he should be granted bail. She promised that he would take antidepressant medication, and if released on bail, his family would supervise him. However, The judge believed that it was not appropriate to release a person who had shown unwavering determination to carry out his actions. Despite the law, the judge stated that the only circumstance in which he would consider granting bail was if Chand agreed to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital. However, this option was unlikely. Therefore, the judge decided to defer the bail decision and requested a psychiatric evaluation for Akshay. Throughout this time, Christie continued to suffer. Her father was scheduled to return from Australia in a week, and she convinced her family not to inform him about what had happened so that he could continue working without worry. Initially, she was afraid not only to travel in public transportation but even to sleep in her own room. Whenever she heard any sound at night, she immediately asked her family to check what it was. Her greatest fear was that Akshay would be released and would attack her family or fixate on another innocent girl. By early November, life began to slowly improve. Chand was scheduled to appear in court on Wednesday, November 9th, and in 2 months, Christie and her family would be living in Australia. The relocation, which was initially meant to mark the beginning of an exciting new chapter in their lives, now became an urgent necessity. On the morning of November 7th, Tracy got up at 6:30 and began preparing for her workday. She let the dogs out, made breakfast, and took a shower. As she was getting dressed, she heard a knock on the door. It was still early, around 7 a.m., but Tracy wasn't surprised by the knock. Christie loved shopping online, and her orders were usually delivered in the morning. While Christie was still asleep, getting some rest before her late shift at work, Tracy went to answer the door herself. There was a young man standing on the porch. Tracy didn't recognize him immediately, but then she realized it was Akshay Chanda. He was holding a knife. Tracy felt fear grip her as Chanda forced his way into her home. She screamed as loudly as she could, hoping that Christie would hear and understand that something terrible was happening and have time to escape. Or maybe the neighbors would hear and come to their aid. Still threatening Tracy with the knife, Chanda asked who else was in the house. Tracy lied and said her husband was home. That was not true. He had already returned to Australia. He had wanted to leave work, but the police convinced him that his family would be safe. But somehow Chanda seemed to know this, which made Tracy suspect he had been watching them for some time. Suddenly, Christie appeared on the stairs near Tracy and Chanda. Barefoot and in her sleepwear, she was awakened by her mother's scream and went upstairs to find out what was happening. When she saw Chanda, Christie screamed. Frozen with fear, she stood at the top of the stairs, unable to move. Chanda continued to direct the knife at Tracy, slowly advancing toward Christie. Then he kicked her in the chest, causing her to tumble down the stairs. Christie got up, ran down the steps, but slipped in her haste and fell again. She then got up and ran through her grandmother's room and into the backyard. Chanda chased after her. Meanwhile, Tracy called the police. Given what Chanda had done previously, she thought he might be trying to scare Christie again. She was confident that Christie would be able to lock herself in her grandmother's room, and Chanda wouldn't be able to reach her. The police were aware of the situation. They would be there within a few minutes and arrest Chanda. Tracy dialed emergency services. But before she could provide her address, she heard a frantic scream. It was Christie. Tracy dropped the phone and ran downstairs. Christie lay on the porch in the backyard, with a pool of blood spreading beneath her. Chanda stood nearby. Tracy rushed to her daughter and embraced her. She couldn't see any wounds, but Christie couldn't move. It seemed difficult for her to breathe. Tracy repeatedly told her daughter that she loved her and begged her to hold on because help was on the way. It seemed to Tracy that Christie was trying to say something to her. Looking into her eyes, Tracy saw that life had just left them. Christie was gone. Chanda just stood there. When Tracy looked at him, she saw that he still held the knife. The blade was bent at a 90-degree angle. Chanda himself was covered in blood. Showing no concern about what might happen to her next, Tracy screamed that he had killed Christie. With a completely emotionless voice, he replied, "I'm glad." The police arrived less than 10 minutes after the attack began. Chanda was still in the backyard, listening to music on an iPad. The broken knife lay on the ground. An officer asked what he was doing there. Chanda replied, "Retribution." Another officer noticed that Chanda's hands were trembling and asked why. He responded, "It's not easy to kill someone, is it?" Chanda was arrested and taken to the police station. Tracy had the difficult task of informing Heather and Brian about what had just happened to Christie. The Marceau family had been convinced that something like this would happen ever since Chanda was released on bail a month earlier. Initially, the judge denied his release, citing the need for further information about the case and the defendant's health condition. However, since he qualified for bail under the law, his lawyer quickly filed 2 applications for release. Chanda wrote a letter to the new judge, David McNaughton, expressing remorse for the attack on Christie. He stated that he deeply regretted what he had put the girl through and, given the opportunity, he would apologize to her and her family. Christie also wrote a letter to the judge, pleading not to release Akshay. She believed that since he had nothing to lose, he would attempt to attack her again. On October 5th, the judge granted Chanda bail, despite reading Christie's letter and being aware that the police also believed it was right to keep him behind bars. Chanda was allowed to return to his home, which was located just 350 meters away from Christie's house, in a straight line. The police were extremely disappointed but assured the Marceau family that they would protect them. Officers promised to check on Chanda at various times of the day, making sure he was at home. All the officers patrolling the area were informed about the case. Overall, the police visited Chanda 23 times in the 32 days he was free, and each time he was at home. Despite the police assurances, Christie's fears grew. And after 32 days, he showed up at her doorstep with a knife. Forensic experts investigating the scene of her death found the knife Chanda used to stab her 10 to 15 times before it bent 90 degrees and became useless. He attacked her from behind, delivering a powerful blow to the back of her head. She fell to the floor, where Chanda continued to strike her on the back. One wound was so severe that Christie almost felt nothing afterwards. In the police station, Chanda was surprisingly calm and immediately confessed to everything. Despite suddenly releasing Christie on one occasion, he had never let go of his desire for revenge, and in prison, he started plotting her murder. Knowing that he needed to escape from prison to carry out his plan, he feigned remorse by writing a sympathetic letter to the judge. While free, he didn't waste any time and waited, knowing that Christie and her family would be protected by the police. Although the judge believed that Chanda's family would keep an eye on him throughout the day, his mother worked long hours, and his sister was too young for such a role. She was scared of him herself. All his mother could do was keep kitchen knives away from him, but Chanda knew what she had in mind and hid one of them. On November 7th, he woke up at 6:30, knowing that the day had come. In 2 days, he was scheduled to appear in court, and Christie probably believed that she was safe. The investigators were confident that Akshay would be found guilty on all charges, since he had confessed to everything. However, they were surprised when he decided to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. Several experts, including one hired by his defense and 2 from the prosecution, evaluated him. Akshay told them that he had been hearing a persistent female voice for some time, especially in the mornings. He claimed that the voice ordered him to kill Christie and wished for her mother's death. Although initially Akshay could resist the voice's influence, he eventually succumbed to it. After consultations with psychiatrists and starting medication, he didn't express remorse for the murder but acknowledged that he would have to live with the knowledge of what he had done. It was incredibly difficult for Christie's parents to come to terms with the medical assessment. Tracy, in particular, struggled. She regretted opening the door to the killer and couldn't forget the last moments of Christie's life. "All I see, all I will ever see, is my daughter lying on my lap, gasping for air, covered in blood, dying for some senseless reason. He just stood there and watched. He didn't even attempt to escape. What kind of person does that?" She demanded punishment for Akshay, but the psychiatrist explained to her that Akshay's symptoms, previously attributed to depression, could now be explained by schizophrenia. Moreover, when depression is treated with medication, symptoms of schizophrenia can become more pronounced. During the first attack, the illness was in its early stage, and he managed to understand that harming the girl would be wrong, so he let her go. However, during the second incident, when he came for her, he was aware of what he was doing, but his illness prevented him from understanding that it was morally unacceptable. Akshay couldn't be tried for murder, but he was found guilty of kidnapping and attempted sexual assault. However, he would still serve his punishment in a psychiatric facility. He would only be released if he ceased to pose a danger to society, but his chances of recovery were extremely slim. The Marceau family relocated to Adelaide, Australia, but they didn't allow Christie's murder to become just another crime statistic. If Akshay had not been released on bail after the first crime, Christie would have moved to Australia and lived happily. Therefore, they started a campaign to change the bail laws. Thanks in part to their efforts, since 2013, defendants are required to prove that they are not a threat to society, instead of the police having to prove the opposite as it was before. On Thursday, July 19, 1990, residents of Florida, Steve and Jane McGowan, received a letter from their 34-year-old sister, Beverly. She bid them farewell and wrote that she was embarking on a journey to find herself in this world. Beverly added that she was quitting her job and selling her apartment because she intended to leave immediately. The contents of the letter deeply shocked the brother and sister. Beverly had worked hard and was satisfied with both her job and her new home. She had recently acquired the apartment she had dreamed of and worked 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. Jane hurried to the police station to report her sister's disappearance, but the authorities could do little since the letters stated that Beverly had left of her own accord. The letters were written in Beverly's handwriting on notepad sheets found at her home. So Steve and Jane went home to Beverly in Pompano Beach to try and find answers to their questions. They immediately noticed that Beverly's red Volkswagen Fox was not in its usual parking spot. Beverly herself was not in the apartment, but it did not give the impression that she had packed up and left for good. There were dirty dishes in the sink, a nightshirt lay on the unmade bed, and clothes hung in the closet. However, there were also signs that Beverly had no intention of returning. The phone was disconnected, the answering machine was missing, and there was no sign of her 2 cats. Steve and Jane rummaged through drawers and discovered that Beverly's passport, birth certificate, and address book were also missing. Beverly worked in the loan department of a bank and had a part-time job at a non-profit organization. Steve contacted the bank to see if her colleagues could shed light on the situation. They informed him that the day before he received the farewell letter, Beverly had taken a sick day, citing illness. This was unusual considering Beverly's reputation as a responsible and reliable employee. During the phone call, she also mentioned that she no longer wanted to live in her apartment and asked them to sell the mortgaged property and get rid of her personal belongings left in the apartment. Beverly was asked to send a telegram confirming her request, and such a telegram was indeed received. Although the circumstances were strange, Steve and Jane had to believe that their sister had truly left without explaining herself to anyone. However, Steve managed to convince the police to file a missing person report, and he closed Beverly's credit cards. He reasoned that closing the cards would disrupt her travel plans and anger her enough to compel her to contact the family. On the same evening that Steve and Jane were inspecting their sister's apartment, a fisherman and his young niece went to search for bait for an upcoming fishing trip. They arrived at a wide irrigation canal located 160 kilometers north of Pompano Beach in a remote area of St. Lucie County. Leaving his niece in the car, the fisherman began walking along the canal when he noticed something that appeared to be a bag of trash. As he approached closer and realized what it was, he hurried back to the car and contacted the police. Deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, who arrived at the location indicated by the fisherman, discovered the body of a woman. It was evident that the perpetrator not only took her life, but also made every effort to prevent her from being identified. However, he overlooked something. On the woman's right ankle, hidden beneath her jeans, there was a small tattoo of a yellow rose. The description of the tattoo was released to the media in the hopes that local residents could identify it. Steve McGowan had already returned home when the phone rang around 10 p.m. It was a friend of his missing sister. She had just heard the news about the discovery in the St. Lucie Canal and the matching tattoo that Beverly had. The next day, Steve and Jane went to St. Lucie to speak with investigators and show them a photograph of their sister's tattoo. Due to the condition of the body, traditional identification methods had to be ruled out, but both of them were confident that it was their Beverly. Dental records comparison confirmed that it was indeed her. The inspection of Beverly's apartment did not reveal any blood or suspicious items. There were no signs of a struggle. Steve and Jane couldn't understand who would harm their sister. She loved her family, especially her nephews, and they loved her. Beverly was not wealthy and was not involved in complicated relationships. Her life was overshadowed by the fact that her two boyfriends died in separate car accidents. However, despite her past, Steve was confident that Beverly had been quite content with her life recently. Although Beverly worked 2 jobs, it was not enough to cover her mortgage payments. To increase her income, she started renting out one of the bedrooms in her apartment. During the search of her apartment, investigators found a notebook with a list of potential tenants. Each entry included the full name, phone number, and the scheduled time for viewing the apartment. Except for one. The first line only had the name Alice and was marked for Tuesday at 6:30. After meeting Alice, Beverly spoke highly of her. The woman had come from London, dressed impeccably, drove an impressive car, and worked for the renowned company IBM. Alice had moved to the region because she was temporarily transferred to the company's office in Fort Lauderdale. She had impressed Beverly to the point that she chose her as the new neighbor and informed her friend that Alice would be moving in on Friday, July 20th. By the way, Beverly mentioned that Alice introduced her to numerology. Alice attempted to predict Beverly's future, but she needed various numbers that held significance in Beverly's life, such as her date of birth, passport number, social security number, and even details from her driver's license. Strangely enough, Beverly provided her with all of these numbers. Overall, she was satisfied with Alice's predictions about her future and shared them with her friends. Unfortunately, she did not share the last name of her new neighbor with them. Alice's identity remained a mystery. Additionally, there was no evidence to suggest that Alice had moved in or even visited Beverly's apartment. The investigators reached out to IBM, where they were informed that they had no employees from the UK working in the South Florida area. They didn't even have an office in Fort Lauderdale. The investigation into Beverly's finances revealed that on the day her body was found, someone withdrew $795 out of the $800 that was in her bank account. Her credit card was then used to purchase women's clothing and books at a shopping center in Miami. The salespeople who served the customer described her as a bright blonde with a British accent. The description matched that of a tall blonde woman who had attracted nationwide attention at the time. 8 years earlier, in 1992, police officer Lori Bembinek had been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her ex-husband's former wife. The case had caused a sensation. Lori's glamorous appearance combined with the high-profile nature of the case made her somewhat of a celebrity. A few days before Beverly's murder, Lori had escaped from prison in Wisconsin. When the Miami salesperson was shown photographs of Lori Bembinek, they recognized her as the woman who had used Beverly's credit card. The police were puzzled as to how the convicted killer's path could have crossed with that of a modest bank employee until it was discovered that Lori had actually fled to Canada and was not in Florida at the time of the crime. However, on Friday, July 20th, one day after Beverly's body was discovered, her card was used again in Miami, this time at a travel agency. The card holder had a notable appearance. It appeared to be a man dressed as a woman. The person wore a cheap black wig in the style of Cleopatra and oval-shaped glasses. The man spoke with a British accent and introduced himself as Sam. Apparently, Sam was planning to fly to London in 2 days, on July 22nd, and used the card to purchase a ticket for British Airways Flight 92. Detectives examined the passenger registration records for Flight 292, as well as all other flights heading to Britain on July 22nd. Beverly McGowan's name was not on any of them. However, Beverly's car was found in the airport parking lot, where it had been parked for 5 days. Fingerprints found inside the car yielded no significant results, but 4 synthetic black wig hairs were discovered. British Airways Flight 292 arrived at Heathrow Airport on Monday, July 23rd, according to London time. After landing, a passenger with short black hair and oval glasses approached the Avis car rental counter. The passenger, presumably Sam, booked a car in Beverly McGowan's name and handed over her driver's license as proof. Beverly had shoulder-length dark hair and wore glasses. The person at the counter resembled her. The clerk asked for a credit card to pay for the car's fuel, and Sam handed over Beverly's Visa card, but the card was declined. Sam explained that they might have exceeded the limit and paid in cash. In reality, by that time, Beverly's brother Steve had cancelled her credit cards. When Florida detectives learned about this unsuccessful transaction, Sam had long disappeared. Since the credit card was no longer active, its transactions could not be traced. Sam's arrival in Britain meant that he was beyond the jurisdiction of American law enforcement agencies. Florida detectives contacted the London police to request their assistance. Detective John Cornish agreed to help with the international investigation. He spoke with the Avis company and instructed their staff to direct the suspect to their nearest office if he contacted them. Later that same week, Sam did contact Avis. He requested an extension on the car rental, and he was asked to visit the nearby Avis office. The police waited for him at the location, but Sam never showed up. A backup plan was devised, where officers would wait at Heathrow Airport on the day of the car's return. That day arrived, but Sam once again failed to appear. In the early morning hours, Sam's abandoned car was found a few miles from the airport, devoid of any clues. Suspecting that Sam might be attempting to fly back to the United States, Detective Cornish ordered his team to board all flights heading to the US on that day to check the passengers, but this endeavor proved futile. The police missed the opportunity to apprehend the criminal. The only lead the police had left was British Airways Flight 292. Since Sam didn't use Beverly's passport to board the flight, it meant he had booked a ticket under a different name. Investigators attempted to examine the 248 passengers on that flight, but by law, they were not allowed to check passengers who didn't reside in Florida. Therefore, they sought assistance from the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. Each passenger's name had to be compared with passport details, and since there was no unified database that consolidated all this information, the process could take years. It wasn't until January 1996 that the State Department provided the police with a name they deemed important. Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson, a British citizen, was on Flight 292. The photo in her passport depicted a woman with dark hair and eyebrows. After her husband's death, she was forced to move into a women's shelter if she had nowhere else to go. Less than a year after her husband's death, a passport was issued in her name. Investigators suspected that someone else had impersonated Sylvia to obtain documents in her name. Since they couldn't locate Sylvia in any way, there was concern that she had suffered a fate similar to Beverly's. The State Department also discovered an intriguing connection between Sylvia and 2 other women, Charlotte Ray Cowan and Elaine Parent. All 3 identities turned out to be inadvertently linked after an incident that occurred a year after Beverly's murder. On May 22, 1991, North Miami police approached a woman in a rented car.
The car had been rented 6 months earlier in Los Angeles and was overdue for return. Stolen license plates were attached to the car to conceal its origin. Inside the car sat a tall, red-haired woman who identified herself as Charlotte Ray Cowan and presented her documents to the officers. It was clear that Charlotte had been staying in the car with 2 dogs. Several wigs, the woman's personal diary, and a number of documents with Charlotte's photograph but different names, Sylvia Hodgkinson and Elaine Parent, were found in the car. The police arrested Charlotte based on her failure to return the rented car. She spent a night in jail and posted bail the next day. Remarkably, despite the woman's obvious use of false identities, the police took no action regarding this matter. On the day of Charlotte's court hearing for the offense, one of the arresting officers was present in the building. When it was time for Charlotte to appear before the court, a red-haired woman stood up. However, the officer who had arrested Charlotte was shocked. The woman summoned to court by the subpoena was not the same woman he had taken into custody. Charlotte herself couldn't understand why she had suddenly received a court summons. She asked the officer if the woman he had arrested was tall and a redhead. When he answered yes, she confidently stated that she knew exactly who it was. Nearly 10 years earlier, in the mid-80s, Charlotte was relaxing at a bar in Orlando when an elegantly dressed woman with a British accent approached her. She had short red hair, like Charlotte, and amazing blue eyes. The woman introduced herself as Anne Trumont and offered to buy Charlotte a drink. Charlotte accepted the offer, and they engaged in casual conversation. During their chat, Anne casually brought up the topic of numerology. She mentioned that she would be happy to create a corresponding matrix for Charlotte and started by asking for her date of birth. One by one, Anne extracted Charlotte's social security number and driver's license details. She jotted everything down on a napkin and gave Charlotte a positive prediction about her future. Anne and Charlotte became instant friends and started communicating. A few days later, Charlotte met Anne's brother, a tall blonde man with the same elegant demeanor as his sister. However, over time, the women saw less of each other until they completely lost touch. So Charlotte was quite surprised when, several months later, Anne called her and said that her aunt had passed away, leaving her a significant inheritance. Anne was supposed to share the money with her brother but claimed that he had decided to have her institutionalized to claim all the money for himself. About a month after the phone call, Anne appeared on Charlotte's doorstep at 3 a.m. She had a mustache, wig, and a man's shirt with a tie. Sobbing, she explained that she had escaped from the institution where her brother had placed her. She was hiding from her family and needed help to disappear. Anne begged Charlotte to allow her to take her birth certificate so that she could create a new identity for herself. Initially, Charlotte refused, but she reluctantly agreed when she saw how distraught Anne was. Her friend promised to return the birth certificate soon. Weeks passed, and Charlotte heard nothing from Anne. She began to worry. Then, finally, she received a letter with the birth certificate and a note from Anne, apologizing for the delay. Charlotte didn't hear anything more about her friend until the moment she received a court summons in 1991. Hearing this fascinating story, the investigators became intrigued by the identity of the elusive and enigmatic fraudster, Elaine Parent. Like others, Parent was a real person, but little was known about her life. She was born in the Bronx, New York, on August 4, 1942. She was the only child of loving and fairly affluent parents. By the time she reached adulthood, she had transformed into a tall, slender beauty with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. At the age of 30, she moved to Florida and worked for a while at a real estate agency until her arrest in 1976 in Fort Lauderdale for shoplifting. Her fingerprints were taken and stored in the database. Then, in 1985, she stole jewelry worth $40,000 from an elderly acquaintance. This was around the same time Parent met Charlotte. Parent's fingerprints were compared to those of the woman arrested in 1991 for failing to return a rented car. They matched.
The woman masquerading as Charlotte Coven was Elaine Parent. Naturally, the conclusion was drawn that the new neighbor, Beverly McGowan Ellis, the elusive suspect Sam, and Elaine Parent were one and the same person. However, they still needed to directly link Elaine to Beverly's murder. The detectives reviewed the evidence in the case and examined a notebook containing letters Beverly had written to her brother and sister using an electrostatic detection device, ESDA. This specialized equipment is used to detect indentations or impressions on paper left by previously written letters. The analysis of the notebook revealed that it had been used for a series of other letters written not in Beverly's handwriting. It seemed the author was a woman who held a strong grudge against Beverly. The messages were rather aggressive and contained threats. The letters were compared to handwriting samples from Elaine Parent, and they matched. The letters written by Parent were addressed to a woman in London who held a high-ranking position as the CEO of a major company. For her safety in the case materials, she was referred to as Witness X. She shed light on many gaps in the life of the elusive fraudster. The woman revealed that she had met Elaine during a trip to Miami in the 1980s, and they quickly became friends. In 1985, when the police were searching for Elaine for the jewelry theft, she apparently fled to London and asked Witness X if she could stay with her. However, the two young women soon realized that they couldn't live together due to Elaine's explosive temperament and instability. In 1990, the con artist returned to the United States, but to Witness X's surprise, she returned to London at the end of July. She was driving a car rented from Ives. 3 months after her return to London, Parent stole 2 dogs belonging to her former friend and escaped to the United States. From there, she sent threatening letters to Witness X and attempted to extort a ransom for her dogs. These dogs were evidently the same ones found in her possession during her arrest in Miami in 1991. By the end of 1996, Parent faced charges of passport forgery from the State Department, but they had no idea where she could be hiding. In 1998, the television show America's Most Wanted aired an episode about Elaine Parent. When the show began, Patricia Nevins from St. Petersburg, Florida, was at home watching television. As soon as she saw Elaine's photo, she immediately recognized her. Patricia Nevins was a church worker and knew Elaine as a blonde named Sandra Little. Patricia met Sandra Little in 1992 when she was living in a homeless shelter in St. Petersburg. Patricia allowed Sandra to stay in her vacant bedroom, and she remained with her for almost 1.5 years. During this period, Sandra filed a lawsuit against a restaurant where she slipped and injured herself. She won the case and received compensation, the amount of which is undisclosed. Patricia described several curious incidents that occurred while she lived with Elaine. Elaine once told her that one way for her to lead a dignified life was to assume a different identity. Then, during a dinner party, Parent mimed cutting a guest's hand to steal a gold bracelet. Patricia arranged for Elaine to speak with a psychiatrist, who later informed Patricia that Elaine was an extremely intelligent sociopath who would leave Patricia's life as quickly as she entered it. This prediction came true when the women went their separate ways in 1993. After the police publicly appealed to the community to help capture Elaine, an intriguing letter was delivered to the office of the St. Lucie County Sheriff. Inside was a copy of a painting done in oil colors. It depicted Elaine Parent wearing a teal-green swimsuit and pearl earrings. Her hair was grey and styled in the same manner Parent often chose. She was portrayed coming out of a pool. On the back, it was printed, "Best wishes, your chameleon." Psychiatrist Barbara Cavan, who had been assisting the police in the case, stated that Parent both desperately needed and feared police attention. The painting is very telling. She sent it to the police to taunt them, as if to say, "I'm alive, I'm okay, look for me, but you'll never find me." In February 1999, Elaine was featured in the documentary series World's Most Wanted, which brought her international attention. Reports poured in from around the world claiming to have seen Parent in Turkey, France, Australia, and South Africa. The press dubbed her the most wanted woman in the world. In April 2002, America's Most Wanted aired another episode about Elaine Parent. Following the program, numerous calls came in from the affluent neighborhood of Panama City, Florida, claiming that a woman living there was Elaine. 3 police officers were dispatched to the address. They arrived at a modest single-story house and knocked on the door. A middle-aged brunette woman, dressed in a beige silk pajama set, answered the door. The officers explained why they had come to see her. The woman introduced herself as Darlene Thompson and presented them with her military ID, which featured her photograph. She did not resemble the photograph of Elaine Parent that the officers had seen. Realizing that the neighbors had made a mistake, the officers nevertheless asked her to accompany them to the station for formalities. Darlene agreed and requested that the officers wait while she changed clothes. While the officers waited outside the bedroom, one of them examined Darlene's ID. Being a former military personnel, he immediately noticed a crucial missing stamp that confirmed the document's authenticity. The officer knocked on the bedroom door to clarify this matter, to which she responded that she was getting dressed. The officers waited for her to come out, but she never appeared. A gunshot rang out, and the officers rushed into the bedroom only to find Darlene dead. Subsequent fingerprint analysis officially confirmed that Darlene and Elaine Parent were the same person. It turned out that the house where Elaine lived belonged to another woman. Elaine had been renting a room from her since August 2001. The homeowner described her as a pleasant woman with a passion for cooking. During the search of the house, Elaine's Florida driver's license was found, featuring her photo but under the name of the woman she was staying with. In a notebook, she had written down information about a man from the neighboring town of Lynn Haven, including his social security number and credit cards. Elaine's closet was filled with wigs and both women's and men's clothing. A book on learning the French language and another on theatrical makeup were also discovered. Some acquaintances of Elaine mentioned that she often worked on a laptop, but it was never found. The diary she had with her when she was arrested over 10 years ago as Charlotte Cavan was also missing. Another intriguing detail to the portrait emerged. The police found a flyer with a photograph of Elaine and the name Antonia Racemen. The flyer stated that she was being sought by the FBI for the murder of a government official at a hotel in Washington. Interestingly, it appeared that Elaine had created the flyer herself, and the local police chief later speculated that she had made it to intimidate someone. The death of Elaine left many unanswered questions. The police believe she had up to 20 different identities that she used across the world, including the USA, UK, Turkey, Israel, France, and South Africa. Some suspect that she may have committed more murders, but no additional victims have been found. 3 years prior to her death, investigator Norma Pfeiffer told the media, "The brutality of the Maguire murder makes me think that someone capable of this has either done it before or will do it again." Opinions are divided as to whether she worked alone or had an accomplice. Some argued that she couldn't have managed Beverly on her own. And let's not forget about the attractive blonde man she presented as her brother. Psychologist Barbara Kerwin described Elaine as a virtuoso in her field, capable of effortlessly reading people's souls and uncovering their vulnerable spots. However, the motive behind her crimes remains completely unclear. Why would someone with Elaine's high intellect choose to engage in criminal activities instead of achieving great heights in any other field, especially considering that her crimes brought her more infamy than wealth? But Kerwin believes she knows the reason behind Elaine's schemes. She was driven by her own psychological demons, Barbara stated. "I believe she impulsively stole the identities of others to fill her own emptiness." Lola Luna Chomnales was born on November 4, 1999, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She grew up in the family of Adriana Belmonte and Diego Chomnales, the son of the renowned chef Beatriz Chomnales. In November 2014, when the girl turned 15, her parents decided to gift her a trip to New York for the Christmas holidays. However, before that, they sent their daughter to spend a few days relaxing with her godmother's family in Rocha, Uruguay. On December 27th, Lola arrived in Uruguay, where she was greeted by her godmother, Claudia Fernandez. The girl was clearly in a great mood, which was captured in a photo taken by Claudia. Claudia, her husband Hernan Tuzinkiewicz, and their 2 children were happy about Lola's arrival. They had planned to spend these few days together, sunbathing on Barra de Veliz's beach, swimming in the sea, and relaxing. That same evening, Lola, Hernan, and his 14-year-old stepson visited a drum festival taking place in the city center. Hernan and the boy didn't leave Lola's side in the crowd, but at some point, the boy moved away from them because he was bored. Nevertheless, after the festival, they all returned home together. The next day, the family went to the beach. Around 3 p.m., Lola asked her godmother for permission to take a walk along the beach. She wanted to walk to the spa resort of Aguas Dulces along a fairly popular trail that allowed her to explore the flora and fauna of the area. Since the route was considered popular and safe for walks, and the locals were known for their friendliness, Claudia had no objections. She told Lola what time they would be waiting for her at home and watched as she calmly walked away from them along the beach. Lola was wearing a bikini and denim shorts. She carried a backpack containing a sarong, a book, her identification, a water bottle, and a towel. She didn't have her phone with her. Obviously, there was poor reception on the beach. The backpack also contained a wallet with 2,000 Uruguayan pesos. Several hours passed, it got dark, and Lola still hadn't returned. Her godmother became worried. The family walked along the route that Lola had planned to take, but she was nowhere to be found. In the evening, Claudia called Lola's parents to explain what had happened. She told Adriana that she had already contacted the police. However, it took another 45 minutes before they arrived at the station and reported the teenager's disappearance. The police began the search for Lola. Since she disappeared during a walk on the beach, it was thoroughly searched both lengthwise and crosswise. Helicopters and search dogs were brought in to assist in the search. Lola's parents immediately arrived in Uruguay to help the police. Almost simultaneously with the start of the investigation, it became known that Adriana and Diego were receiving anonymous calls. The caller did not ask for a ransom or make any demands. They simply stated that Lola was with them and that she was fine. Unfortunately, this turned out to be untrue. 2 days later, on December 30th, her body was found partially covered in sand on the beach. She was in an area with many dunes and dense vegetation. There were shallow knife cuts on her neck and signs of blows on her head. The autopsy revealed that Lola was attacked from behind, then dragged or forced to the location where she was found. The killer pressed her face into the sand for a prolonged period until she suffocated. This was determined by the presence of sand in her lungs. After the news of the crime became known, there was an unprecedented uproar in the press of Argentina and Uruguay. As often happens in such cases, journalists began to put forward theories about what could have happened. The suspicions of the Uruguayan police and the media immediately fell on the family of Lola's godmother, especially on Hernan, and there were several reasons for that. Firstly, they claimed to Adriana and Diego that they had already contacted the police, although they actually delayed before going to the station. Secondly, the media tried to see something sinister in the fact that Lola, Hernan, and his 14-year-old stepson went to a drum festival together, but at some point, the boys separated from them, leaving the girl with Hernan. A hypothesis related to violence against Lola emerged, but the forensic expert found no evidence to support this. However, there were other reasons to suspect them. Claudia and Hernan immediately hired a lawyer, and not a single family member agreed to take a polygraph test. Lola's parents added fuel to the fire by making a series of bold statements. In particular, Diego stated that he had long ceased to trust Hernan, which provoked further questions. If he didn't trust the man, why did he allow his daughter to go on vacation with them? It is important to note that Claudia and Adriana had been friends for 25 years. Hernan was Claudia's second husband, and Lola's parents had known him for about 5 years. They all originally lived in Argentina, but Hernan and Claudia moved to Uruguay. When Hernan was interrogated, the investigators noted contradictory statements, which led to his arrest on December 31st. Claudia was arrested on suspicion of concealing evidence. Her son was also detained because he was suspected of making those anonymous calls. It is not confirmed with certainty that he was the one who called Adriana and Diego, but it is evident that those calls were a failed attempt at a joke. Nevertheless, the police interrogated all 3 family members for several days, but there was no evidence against them. The investigators explained that they found some discrepancies in their testimonies, but they were insignificant. Hernan claimed they returned home at 11 o'clock, while his son said it was 12. Besides that, the police had nothing to charge Hernan, Claudia, or her son with. Therefore, on January 2, 2015, they were all released. Apparently, after various public statements, the relationship between the friends suffered. Claudia and her loved ones never spoke to Lola's parents again, nor did they pick up the phone to offer condolences. Adriana believes that their lawyer may have given them such advice. However, she believes that as friends, a simple human gesture would have been to call and express condolences, especially considering their 25 years of friendship. A few days after the discovery of the body, Lola's pink backpack was found. It was also buried in the sand about 200 meters from where Lola's body was found. This immediately raised a lot of questions. How did the police initially not find the body and now the backpack, despite thoroughly searching the entire beach and its surroundings multiple times? Additionally, the authorities in the town had claimed from the beginning that the beach was a very safe area. But it was at least strange because drug dealers operated there, especially in the area where the body was found. Nonetheless, almost all of the girl's belongings remained in the backpack, except for 2,000 pesos that the perpetrator took from her wallet. Furthermore, the towel and documents had bloodstains on them. Forensic experts examined these items and found Lola's DNA on them, but it was mixed with male DNA. Since suspicions had not been completely lifted from Hernan, his DNA was compared to the one found. They checked it against the Uruguayan police database, but there were no matches there either. After the discovery of the backpack, one suspect caused a big stir. He was suspected based on witness testimonies regarding his whereabouts on the day of the murder. According to local residents, a man nicknamed El Conejo, the rabbit, was working on a roof near the beach at the time the girl went for a walk. In the middle of the day, the man went for lunch, and his colleagues knew that he didn't have any money with him. However, he returned with food and cash. This immediately raised the question of where he got the food if he didn't buy it. But that's not all. Someone even claimed to have seen him with a pink backpack on the day of Lola's disappearance. One newspaper wrote that he confessed to the murder, and other media outlets picked up the news. However, it turned out to be untrue. The man provided an explanation of where he got the food. Although the police suspected that he had actually stolen it from beachgoers, there was no evidence connecting him to Lola's case. He never confessed to anything, and after his release, he filed a lawsuit against the newspapers that spread unverified news. At this point, the investigation significantly stalled. The main suspects had already been released, and the investigators had no leads to pursue. At first glance, it seemed that the girl didn't know anyone in the town, but she had managed to attend a drum festival in the city center, and being sociable and open, she freely interacted with people. Therefore, the police had to investigate this lead. They detained and interrogated about 40 people, mainly vendors and dealers from the beach, but they were all eventually released. The situation was further aggravated by the constant changes in prosecutors and judges, and whenever a new prosecutor was appointed, they would review the case from scratch. This significantly hindered the investigation. But on February 18, 2015, there seemed to be some progress in the case. An anonymous call was made to the police. The caller stated that Angel Moreira, also known as El Cachila or Keisha, was involved in the crime. The police arrested and interrogated the man. He worked on the beach, parking cars. Angel explained that he met Lola when she was walking along the beach. He approached her to offer some souvenir trinkets for sale. They exchanged a few sentences about where the girl came from when Lola mentioned feeling dizzy. Angel suggested that they go to a shady area. He took her to a place where tall bushes and dunes provided some shade and coolness. There, the girl fell to her knees. Angel tried to check her pulse, but not hearing it, he got scared and ran away. The statement sounded extremely strange, but without evidence, the police had to release him. 4 years passed when the new prosecutor in Jorge Bay's case reviewed the materials and decided to interrogate Angel again. After the interrogation on May 22, 2019, the man was arrested. This time he was charged with obstruction of justice. His DNA did not match the DNA on Lola's towel and documents, so the prosecutor concluded that he was covering up the person who was truly guilty of the crime. Bass explained that in Angel's statements made in 2015, he revealed details that only someone who was with Lola at the time of the murder could have known. He knew that Lola fell to her knees on the sand, and a forensic expert confirmed this. However, Lola didn't fall because she suddenly felt dizzy, but because she had received shallow knife wounds. Despite Angel's arrest, the Chommeles family still awaited an answer to the main question for several more years. Until geneticist Natalia Sandberg became interested in the case, 7 years after the murder, the case took a decisive turn. And how the investigators found the suspect resembles a plot from a detective novel. It occurred to Natalia Sandberg to trace the genetic DNA trace of an unknown man found on Lola's towel and documents. There were no matches on the paternal line, but the examination of the maternal line revealed a small match with a prisoner serving time for murder. In other words, the man who left his blood on Lola's towel is related to the man currently serving a sentence. The third crime, in which the victims were Marines who died in the naval complex on Cerro de Montevideo, was the tip of the iceberg that allowed investigators to reach the true killer of Lola Chommeles. The murders took place on Sunday morning, May 31, 2020. Juan Manuel Escobar, Alex Galinia, and Alan Rodriguez were found shot in the head. The police established that the killer is Jonathan Brand Gundy. Jonathan was born in Rocha. When the police found his mother and examined her DNA, it became clear that they were looking for another son of the woman, Jonathan's half-brother. The woman told the investigators that she had given birth to 11 children from different fathers, including 8 boys. But only one son was given up for adoption when he was 18 days old. It turned out that he was the one the police had been searching for 7 years. Their new suspect was named Leonardo Senar. In 2014, during Lola's murder, Senar was homeless, spending his days and nights between La Paloma, Chuy, and Castillos. He lived in these places through odd jobs. But recently, he settled in the city of Chuy, lived with a girlfriend, and worked in a bakery. The man had a history of police records from 2003 to 2009 for aggression, theft, and violence. Despite his run-ins with the law, his DNA was not stored in the database because the database itself was created after 2012. Therefore, on May 18, 2022, the police obtained a search warrant for his house. They anticipated that the man would refuse to provide his DNA, and they were right. However, forensic experts examined the man's toothbrush and comb. To the surprise and joy of the forensic experts, the DNA match was 99.9%, confirming it was his DNA. On May 19th, the suspect was arrested at the border with Brazil. During the interrogation, Leonardo claimed that he had no connection to the crime. As for his DNA found on the identification card and the girl's towel, he explained that he found a pink backpack on the beach. When he looked inside, he saw a wallet with 2,000 pesos and stole the money. Regarding the blood, he said that a few hours before, He cut himself with a bottle shard at work, and when he reached into the backpack, the bandage fell off and the cut started bleeding. Therefore, he wiped his hand with Lola's towel. However, there were several inconsistencies in his version. Firstly, his blood was not simply found on the girl's belongings, it was mixed with her blood. This couldn't have happened if he found the backpack and just took out the wallet. Secondly, according to his own words, someone else, not Leonardo, took Lola's backpack on the 28th, the day of the murder, after Leonardo stole the money and inexplicably buried it 4 kilometers away from where it was found, without taking anything from it. Even the suspect couldn't deny the absurdity of this story. Finally, his colleagues who worked with him in December 2014 didn't recall the incident with a broken bottle and Leonardo's cut. Moreover, according to documentation, Leonardo was no longer employed at the brewery on the day of the crime. Here is what the police believe actually happened. In the middle of the day on December 28, 2014, when Lola went for a walk on the beach, she was intercepted by Leonardo and Angel. They dragged her into an area with dunes and bushes. There, Lola tried to escape, and the kidnappers struck her several times on the head and stabbed her in the neck, causing her to fall to her knees. However, these wounds were not fatal, and Lola continued to resist. It is likely that she also screamed loudly, trying to attract the attention of other vacationers or beach vendors. In an attempt to silence Lola, they pressed her face into the sand. They pressed for too long, causing Lola to suffocate. The police believe that the motive for the crime was violence, although the assailants were unable to carry out their intended act and ended up killing her because they did not expect such fierce resistance from the teenage girl. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that Leonardo was previously tried for a case very similar to Lola's. That case occurred in 2009 when Leonardo was 26 years old. The victim was a 15-year-old girl, just like Lola. Leonardo followed her for several blocks before attacking her with a knife. He dragged the victim to a remote wooded area where he assaulted her. The Uruguayan police are convinced that at least 2 people were involved in the attack on Lola. Therefore, they charged Leonardo with aggravated murder and Angel with harboring a criminal. Jorge Base demanded a sentence of 10 years of imprisonment for Angel and 15 to 30 years for Leonardo. In June 2021, Angel, who had been in prison since 2019, was released by a judge's decision granting him conditional early release under oath. Despite psychiatric and psychological evaluations characterizing Angel as an aggressive and impulsive individual lacking impulse control, the judge found no grounds to accuse him of harboring a criminal, as harboring entails assisting the criminal after the crime has been committed. In this case, Angel should have been charged as an accomplice. Therefore, according to the judge, Angel Morel's actions do not fall under the category of harboring. However, the prosecutor filed an appeal against the judge's decision, stating that Angel was present before, during, and after the crime. Despite their initial suspicions, Lola's parents, Adriana and Diego, trust the evidence presented by the police, agree that 2 suspects were involved in the crime, and hope for a swift verdict. On May 13, 2015, around 5 p.m., firefighters extinguished a raging fire in a garage by the roadside in the village of Sand Lake, Michigan. At that moment, a frightened woman ran up to their vehicle, shouting that her neighbors were dead. Several firefighters hurried with the woman to her neighbor's house. In the bedroom, lying on the floor in a pool of blood, were 2 lifeless bodies. It appeared that they had been shot. To preserve the evidence at the crime scene, the firefighters refrained from touching anything and immediately informed the police that they had found 2 bodies and required investigators and forensic experts. Forensic experts had been working at the crime scene for about an hour, collecting evidence and photographing the bodies of 46-year-old Martin Durham and 47-year-old Glenna Durham when one officer noticed a slight movement in Glenna's chest. Just a tiny bit. He rushed to her body and tried to feel for a pulse. But before he could touch her, Glenna's eyes opened wide,
and she sat up abruptly, screaming, "What are you doing, Marty?"
The officer immediately called for paramedics, who transported the injured woman to the local hospital. Marty and Glenna first met as teenagers in the early 1980s. Marty invited the girl on a date to a local open-air theater where they lost their virginity on the very same evening, with little interest in the movie itself. Their relationship progressed quickly and passionately, but they broke up after a few months, partly because 17-year-old Glenna was married. Soon Marty started a family of his own. Christina Keller was 14 years old when she met 19-year-old Marty at a party held at his house. The young man seemed charming and fun to the girl, but also a little strange because he immediately declared that he would marry her someday. The next day, Marty showed up at her doorstep. Apparently, he made a favorable impression on Christina's parents because after that, he never left her life. Their friendship developed into a romantic relationship, and soon 16-year-old Christina discovered that she was expecting their first child. Within 2 years, she was carrying their second son, which prompted the young couple to get married. 11 months later, Christina gave her husband a daughter. Christina was 19 and Marty was 24 at the time. Initially, the young family lived with relatives, but in early 1995, Marty obtained a higher-paying job at a factory in Michigan, and the family of 5 moved there. However, on the evening of February 16, 1995, while returning from work, Marty was involved in a car accident. Another vehicle, speeding through a red light, collided with his car. The larger vehicle practically crushed Marty's car, trapping him inside. Marty was taken to the hospital, where he was in a clinically dead state for about 5 minutes. The left side of his body suffered severe injuries, and he remained in a coma for over 3 weeks. When he finally regained consciousness, he had no recollection of his wife, children, or much of his past life. He spent a year and a half learning to walk, speak, eat, and take care of himself again. Throughout this time, Christina supported him. Physically, Marty increasingly resembled his former self, but psychologically, he had changed. Due to the brain trauma, he experienced bouts of rage. He never raised his hand against his wife and children but became a domineering person. Even his sense of humor became darker. In 2000, almost 5 years after the accident, Christina filed for divorce. She still cared deeply for her husband, but her feelings had transformed into more of a maternal nature, as she took on the role of his caregiver and could no longer relate to him in any other way. In May 2001, Marty purchased his first home using the funds he received from the insurance company, along with a bank loan. The house was located in the small village of Sand Lake, Michigan, where only 500 people reside. Marty was incredibly proud of his new home, where he moved in with his 2 sons and an African gray parrot named Bud. 2 months after moving into the house, Marty was surprised by a knock on his door from a 16-year-old girl who claimed to be his daughter. Marty asked who her mother was, and it turned out to be Glenna, his first love. The girl knew that her mother had had an affair early in her marriage, and she was born a few months later. She wanted to establish her paternity for certain. A DNA test confirmed that the girl was indeed Marty's biological daughter, born out of wedlock. This revelation led to the rekindling of Marty and Glenna's relationship, despite Glenna still being married. Clearly, Glenna had never been able to forget Marty, as she had a tattoo with his name on her arm throughout her marriage. Glenna divorced her husband and moved in with Marty. They were very happy together and soon had a new wedding ceremony. Glenna's new husband meant everything to her. The couple spent all their time together, visiting family, and going to the local casino once or twice a week. Even when Marty went hunting, Glenna would sit in the car and read a novel. Officially taking on the responsibility of caring for her husband, Glenna received $3,200 per month for her services. Marty's disability benefits amounted to over $1,000 per month. Additionally, Glenna sold excess medication from Marty, so their monthly income was approximately $5,000. When Marty's sons moved out, this income was sufficient for their life in the small village. However, by 2010, Marty's health, both mental and physical, had deteriorated significantly. The couple continued to spend all their time together and with their friends, including Connie and Keith Ream, another neighboring couple. On Monday, May 11, 2015, Marty offered to mow the lawn in Connie and Keith's backyard. He enjoyed doing this work and did it completely free of charge. Later that evening, all four of them, Connie, Keith, Marty, and Glenna, sat on the neighbor's terrace, and the Durhams returned home around 9 p.m. The next day, on Tuesday, at 8:26 a.m., Keith sent Marty a message asking how he was feeling, but he didn't receive a response. This was strange because Marty always promptly answered calls and messages. Throughout the day, Keith sent several more messages to his friend with the same result. Later that day, Connie approached the neighbor's door and knocked. She heard the Shelby family's dog barking, but no one opened the door. Keith even sent a joking message to Glenna saying, "What did you do to Marty?" Of course, she didn't respond to him either. On Wednesday, at 7:30 a.m., Connie approached the neighbor's house again and rang the doorbell. The only response she received was the dog barking. She walked around the house, checking if any doors or windows were open. Everything was locked as usual. Throughout the day, Connie and Keith tried to contact their neighbors, becoming increasingly worried. After work, around 4:30 p.m., Connie approached the neighbor's house for the third time and knocked. She was sure she would have to break the door, but to her surprise, when she touched the handle, she discovered that the door was not locked this time. Connie cautiously opened the door and called out for the neighbors. But at the door, she was only met by the Shelby family pet, who led her into the living room where there was a gruesome mess. Documents and photographs were scattered everywhere, a broken lamp and other items were in disarray. Following Shelby into the bedroom, Connie found the homeowners lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Marty was only in his underwear, while Glenna was fully dressed, with her legs covered by a blanket. Connie rushed out of the neighbor's house and ran towards a fire truck she noticed further down the road. Marty was not as lucky as his wife. 5 bullets that hit his back, forearm, and chest left him no chance of survival. He had been dead for several days. Glenna was shot twice, with both shots hitting the area behind her right ear. Blood was found not only in the bedroom, but also on the chair in the living room and on a pillow with 2 bullet holes. Underneath the chair, a gun and 2 empty shells were found. In the bedroom, there were 5 more shell casings, 1 near the door and 4 near Marty's body, totaling 7 in total. However, the gun found near the chair was designed for 6 bullets. This means that the perpetrator found time to reload the gun before continuing the shooting. Apart from the living room and bedroom, the rooms in the house appeared completely normal. There were no signs of forced entry, and in the kitchen, there was a bowl of spaghetti and a piece of garlic bread on the table. Later that same evening, when Glenna was taken to the hospital, Marty's children were allowed to take the family pets, a dog and a parrot, and bring them to their mother's house, Christina. Although the children were only permitted to take the pets, the trio did not miss the opportunity to search the house and discovered a sealed envelope with the word personal written on it. Inside, they found letters from Glenna addressed to her children and ex-husband. In the letters, she expressed her love for the children and asked for their forgiveness for not being the best mother. She also asked her ex-husband to take care of the children. Additionally, in Glenna's drawer, they found a packet of unpaid bills. They handed over all the findings to the police. The investigators began questioning the family's relatives and friends about their relationships and financial situation. They loved spending time together and were truly absorbed in each other's company. However, it soon became clear that they were facing serious financial difficulties. Glenna was in charge of the family's accounts, and relatives believed that Marty was unaware of the severity of their situation because he was quite frugal. On the other hand, Glenna had developed a serious addiction to gambling. She would spend hundreds of dollars on lottery tickets and lose thousands of dollars at the casino. But whenever her husband approached her, she would pretend to be playing with $1 bills. She played every week, and in 2010 alone, Glenna spent $75,000 on her addiction. The family had fallen behind on tax payments, had credit card debt, and Marty's car was on the verge of being repossessed. However, the most pressing issue was their home. Glenna hadn't made mortgage payments for over a year, and they had accumulated a debt of $48,000. In early April 2015, a few weeks before the attack on the family, Marty's mother saw a list of homes that would be seized due to debts, and Marty's address was listed there. She called Glenna, who assured her that the newspaper had printed the wrong address and that she would sort it out. Of course, it turned out that their home was indeed being taken away. Despite the fact that Marty had taken out the mortgage, on April 28th, Glenna received a notice that their home would be auctioned if they didn't pay $5,000. Interestingly, the auction was scheduled for May 12th, just a day before Marty and Glenna were found by their neighbor. The investigators concluded that Marty was unaware of the impending loss of their home because he had been renovating it for the past 2 months. Just 2 days before their deaths, he had painted the bathroom. After 3 days in the intensive care unit, Glenna regained consciousness. She had no recollection of the day of the murders or the preceding days. She couldn't even remember writing the letters to her children and ex-husband. Since the eyewitness couldn't provide any helpful information, the police had few leads or clues to work with. The weapon contained multiple DNA samples, as Marty was an avid hunter and often showed his firearms to friends. However, Glenna and Marty also sold drugs, for which they received cash payments, and large sums of money were stored in envelopes in a safe. Could this have been an unplanned robbery? The living room was in disarray, as if someone had been searching for something, and the cash from the safe was indeed missing. This version of events seemed the most plausible, but finding the killer among the clients of their illegal activities was like looking for a needle in a haystack. A whole year passed before an unexpected witness helped solve the case. It was a 19-year-old parrot named Bud, who had been living with Christina for the past 12 months. Bud was an African grey parrot and had the unique ability of not only mimicking sounds and words he heard in his environment but also imitating human voices. Originally, he was Christina's beloved pet, but Marty took him, presumably as a way to get back at his ex-wife for leaving him. Upon returning to his beloved owner, Bud started reproducing various conversations he had heard while living with Marty, such as how Marty played with the dog. But at some point, he began repeating an argument between a man and a woman. They were clearly arguing with each other, raising their voices and occasionally mixing profanity with regular words. And at the end of the dialogue, a male voice shouted clearly, "No, no, don't shoot." Christina recorded this scene performed by the parrot on video but didn't report it to the police, thinking it would be laughed off. However, when a local journalist interviewed Marty's mother a year after his murder, she mentioned the video. The journalist became very interested and aired it on the news. The video quickly went viral, and the increased public attention forced the police to reopen the case and focus their attention on one suspect, Glenna Durham. They examined Marty and Glenna's phones and discovered that the last thing Marty did on his phone was search for information about lawnmowers on the evening of the 11th, after they returned home from the neighbors. The examination of Glenna's phone turned out to be much more intriguing. It had been used until the 13th, the day the bodies were found. From 3:32 a.m. to 4:48 a.m., someone used the phone 5 times to find information about the gun used in the shootings, including how to reload it. The last message was sent to Glenna's mother at 4:48 a.m. and said, "I love you, forgive me." Glenna was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She insisted on her innocence, and her lawyer tried to prove that another family member or a stranger had broken into the house to steal medication, cash, or Marty's weapons. However, the forensic experts did not find any signs of forced entry into the house. And what about the money from the safe? It turned out that Marty's children had taken it while they were searching the house when Glenna was taken to the hospital and their father to the morgue. When investigators accidentally learned about this, they stated that nobody had asked them about the money at the police station, so they didn't say anything. In any case, the version of a robber was discarded because nothing was stolen. The prosecution's version of events painted a much more plausible picture. Here's what they believed happened. Since Marty was in his underwear, he could have been killed on the morning of the 12th. The man must have learned about the inevitable loss of the house, became very upset, and a heated argument ensued. When Glenna grabbed the weapon, Marty turned and tried to run into the bedroom. She shot him in the back. Marty was still on his feet, reaching for another weapon in the bedside table. Glenna fired again, hitting his forearm. Only then did he turn to face her, and she sent 3 more bullets into his chest. Marty fell lifeless on the bedroom floor. Glenna spent the whole day doing paperwork. She wrote letters to her ex-husband and children and prepared spaghetti for lunch. When the neighbor showed up at her house for the first time on the evening of the 12th, Glenna was still engaged in these activities. Understanding that the neighbors would start to worry about her and Marty, no matter what Glenna planned, she needed to act quickly. She settled into a chair in the living room, placed a pillow against her head, and fired. However, nothing happened. The pillow absorbed the force of the shot, and the bullet barely grazed her. Since it was the last bullet in the pistol, she had to look up online how to reload it. This means she did not attempt it again until the early morning of the 13th when she sent a message to her mother. Perhaps she still had doubts when Connie knocked on the door again at 7:30 a.m. because the door was still locked. But when Connie left, Glenna must have unlocked the door, sat in the chair, took the pillow, and tried again. This time the injury turned out to be more serious, but as her doctor later explained, she did not hit any important veins, arteries, or penetrate the skull. It's hard to imagine what state she was in, but since head wounds always bleed profusely, she may have decided that she would simply bleed out. She made her way to the bedroom, where her husband's body had been lying all this time, and collapsed on the floor, covering her legs with a blanket. Whether she staged the scene when the police officer touched her or only regained consciousness at that moment is unknown. And we may never know because Glenna continues to claim memory loss. The jury believed the prosecution's version. On Wednesday, July 19, 2017, after 9 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty of murder. Glenna Durham was sentenced to life imprisonment. Of course, the parrot named Badder was not invited to court as a witness. And it's not because he swears terribly. It's simply impossible to prove that he didn't hear that particular dialogue on a TV show or the radio, not to mention how he could take an oath in the witness stand. In other words, if Badder had participated in the process and less than 24 hours had passed since Glenna's guilty verdict, her lawyer would have filed an appeal. On February 19, 2001, at the Battlebridge Basin, a part of the Regent's Canal in London, 10 body parts belonging to an unidentified woman were discovered. The body parts were found in 6 different bags and weighed down with bricks. Who was she, and who killed her? These hastily dismembered remains belonged to an ex-girlfriend of John Sweeney, a jealous, perpetually drunken, and vengeful sadist. He referred to himself as a scalp hunter, but the press dubbed him the Canal Killer. Born John Patrick Sweeney on Saturday, October 13, 1956, The boy grew up in Kirkdale, a working-class district of Liverpool. Sweeney's childhood was unremarkable and devoid of significant events. Although his family was poor, his parents instilled in him a sense of pride, moral values, and the importance of hard work. The boy dreamed of studying art, but he was convinced to choose a more reliable profession. Thus, after training as a carpenter, for 5 years John traveled to different countries, working on construction sites with a bag full of tools, pockets full of cash, and eyes fixed on women. It was during this little-known episode of his life that something changed in John. When he returned to Britain several years later, he came back as an envious, jealous, and malicious person whose life was consumed by a passion for alcohol, illicit substances, and violence. Upon returning to Liverpool, John still looked like the boy who had left a few years earlier, with his tousled red hair and mischievous sparks in his eyes. But his almost childlike face, which always seemed kind and smiling, concealed a growing rage within him. After meeting the lovely Anne Bramley in 1976, John married her and moved in with her. Soon after, they had children. However, it was not a happy union. John was either absent from home and uninvolved in raising the children, or he behaved aggressively and horrifically abused his wife. He often used different aliases, such as Joe Johnson, Joe Carroll, or Liverpool Joe, to hide the increasing number of charges against him for various offences. In 1979, after 3 years of marriage, concerned for the safety of her children and repeatedly reporting her husband to the police, Anne made a courageous decision and filed for divorce. 2 years later, she gave John one last chance, believing that he had changed, overcome his addiction, and that a bright future awaited them. But her husband had not changed. He was still intoxicated, drugged, and dangerous, and he was consumed by a desire for revenge. He was not going to allow her to leave him again. Their second marriage lasted barely a year. Anne escaped to her family in the middle of the night. But no matter how far she ran or how carefully she hid, John always found her. In November 1982, settling with her children in a cottage in a small town, and thought she had found refuge, but her peace was shattered because John Sweeney followed her. In the evening, when a piercing wind blew from the hills, covering the moon with dense clouds, and the snow crunched under his feet, John approached the new home of the family. Through a gap in the curtains, he noticed a light in the house but heard no sound and saw no movement. Realizing that nobody was home, the man broke the lock on the back door. Inside, seeing food on the table, children's toys on the floor, and family photos on the fireplace mantel, he felt even more acutely rejected by Anne. John slipped into the darkness of his wife's bedroom, opened the closet, and hid inside. And while he stood there, surrounded by familiar things, inhaling the scent of her perfume, surrounded by everything that reminded him of her departure, John waited for his wife's return with a hammer in one hand and an axe in the other. He didn't have to wait long. Just 2 minutes later, he heard the jingling of her keys. The front door opened, and light sequentially filled each room until he heard quiet footsteps in the bedroom. From the tension, the man's finger joints turned pale as he anxiously gripped the hammer and axe, prepared for a furious attack on his soon-to-be ex-wife. Waiting for the perfect moment, John burst out of the closet and saw 2 police officers in front of him, thick, strong guys who already had handcuffs ready. John dropped the weapons, and thoughts raced through his mind about how to explain who he was and what he was doing in the closet with a hammer and axe. He claimed he was preparing a surprise for his wife. One can only guess what kind of surprise it would have been if the police officers hadn't shown up. However, luckily for Anne and the children, they were having a pleasant evening at the neighbor's house when they heard the sound as if someone had entered their home. Assuming it was a burglar, they called the police. John was arrested, but he was not charged with attempted murder or anything similar. Since it is difficult to prove intentions to commit a crime, and considering that everything happened in what could formally be considered his own home, the law couldn't do anything to him. He was released on the condition of staying away from Anne. John started over and moved to London. He returned to Liverpool only to visit his mother. Although he and them crossed paths more than once, they managed to maintain civilized relations for the sake of the children until her death in 2001. In the same year, 10 body parts, placed in 6 separate bags and weighted down with bricks, were dumped at the Battlebridge Basin Canal in London. But the body in the canal did not belong to Anne. John ever again attempted to take her life. Perhaps he never had the opportunity again, perhaps he still loved her, or perhaps he knew it was wrong to deprive the children of a caring mother. Thus, with the same fury in his eyes, jealousy in his heart, and impatient tremor in his hands, John set off once again in search of love, an unsuspecting girl whom he would attempt to control, and her name was Melissa Halstead. But this time, he turned to his other passion, art, and his dark paintings would unveil the veil of mystery over his much more sinister plans. Born in Ohio, Melissa Halstead was a bright, courageous, and cheerful girl whose free-spirited nature was balanced by kindness and inner warmth. Melissa always saw the best in people, and although it took her a long time to trust a stranger enough to become her friend, once you became her friend, you became her friend forever. At the age of 15, scouts from the renowned Ford modeling agency in New York took notice of the beautiful and striking girl, and that's where her career began. She traveled across America, Europe, and Asia. By 1986, after a successful modeling career and obtaining education as a makeup artist and photographer, Melissa settled in London in anticipation of a new chapter in her life. Melissa hardly told her family anything about her new boyfriend, whom everyone called Liverpool Joe. Whatever she saw in this red-haired, moody figure was a mystery to everyone, but whatever it wasn't worth it. Because the man didn't hesitate to disfigure her beautiful face, using his fists in fits of drunken rage. These were alarming signs, and Melissa repeatedly tried to leave. Over the course of 12 months of living together, Melissa and John Sweeney, the police were called to her rescue twice when he brutally beat her. But both times, John only received a slap on the wrist, forcing him to pay a fine of £5. In April 1988, the man frightened poor Melissa so much, waving a knife, that in a gruesome foreshadowing of her fate, she told her sister that if she ever disappeared, it meant John had killed her. This time, the court banned him from ever approaching the girl. Melissa's work visa was about to expire, and she continued to travel thousands of kilometers away from John, visiting Austria, France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. But no matter how far she went, how skillfully she hid, or how cautiously she noticed traces, he always found her. His paranoia fueled by alcohol, his jealousy fueled by rejection, and the court conditions that had no significance beyond Britain allowed him to track down his supposedly unfaithful girlfriend to her new apartment in Vienna, Austria. Without realizing that the shattered relationship was his fault, and driven mad by the thought that Melissa was cheating on him, John burst into the house through the back door, found and gagged her neighbor, and searched the apartment. He examined every cabinet in search of signs of her infidelity. Melissa had learned from the experiences of his furious attacks. She knew there was no point in arguing, trying to convince him otherwise, or even dignifying him with a response. Instead, understanding that he needed time to cool down, she bought him a ticket to Amsterdam. Whether it was a clever ploy to distract a dangerous lover, a kind gesture to give him a chance to calm down, or an honest promise to resume their relationship is unknown, but it worked. John took the ticket and left. But a few days did not calm him down. On the contrary, he blamed Melissa for everything he had ever experienced because of women who deceived and rejected him. She rejected him like Anne, abandoned him like Anne, and destroyed him like Anne. John's anger came full circle, and it was time to finish what he had started, to seek revenge. On Friday, November 4th, 1988, 4 days later and almost 6 years after the failed attack on Anne, John approached Melissa's apartment. Unlike that night, Melissa was at home. Unlike that night, he didn't break in but knocked on the door. Unlike that night, when Melissa saw her stalker had returned, an argument ensued. But just like that night 6 years ago in Anne's cottage, John was prepared. The knuckles of his right hand turned white with impatience as he clenched a hammer. He told Melissa that he had calmed down and simply forgot something in her apartment. Waiting for the moment when Melissa turned her back to him, John gritted his teeth, his hand shot up, and he brought down the steel edge of the hammer on the girl's head. Melissa felt a powerful blow, and her vision instantly darkened, but miraculously she survived. Lying in a hospital bed with bruises and a brain fracture, she declared that all she wanted was to help him, but now she understood that he truly hated her. John was arrested on the same day. Hatred for the girl continued to boil in him while in prison. In his troubles, he blamed only her. And here he resorted to his favorite pastime again, drawing. His drawings were not only frightening, realistic, and highly detailed, but they also served as a confession of the thoughts and desires that consumed him. His imagination was so deranged that it's hard to describe it in words. The most disturbing sketch he sarcastically titled Romantic Weekend 2 in Austria. But if it could be characterized in any way, it was certainly not romantic. However, Melissa knew nothing about the drawings. She believed his tears and assurances that she was all he had, so she took an unexpected step. The judge sentenced John to 12 months in prison and a 10-year ban on entering Austria to protect his victim from any danger. But he was released earlier after an emotional plea from the person he almost killed, Melissa. And on Monday, March 27, 1989, after serving only half of his sentence, 34-year-old John Sweeney walked free, inhaling the fresh Austrian air as the cold breeze played with his red beard. The stunningly beautiful Blom, a former model, kissed him on the lips. Melissa arrived in a car full of luggage to pick up John. They headed to the Netherlands, where they wouldn't be bothered by the deportation order, to start a new life together. However, those 6 months in prison did nothing to rid the man of his drinking habit, his use of illicit substances, his paranoia, jealousy, and his obsession with violence and torture. And their new home was as libertine and indulgent as it was an unsuitable place for someone like him. Although John occasionally worked, his earnings were only enough for alcohol, and it was Melissa's successful career that allowed them to pay for housing, food, and other expenses. Month after month, the beatings were repeated, which the girl concealed behind expertly applied makeup and poorly thought-out excuses. Thanks to her work as a photographer and makeup artist, she traveled a lot, but the more she was absent, the more John drank and filled himself with jealousy and rage. Finally, in late April 1990, Melissa returned home to Amsterdam, to the apartment she shared with her boyfriend. She decided to break up with him for good. On Thursday, May 3, 1990, in a coastal town called Rotterdam, located 50 miles from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, a military-style bag appeared on the surface of a canal. Upon seeing it, 2 police officers decided it was either stolen luggage or discarded trash. Inside, they found the torso of a naked woman. Just the torso, without hands, feet, or a head, and there were no belongings or documents present. The perpetrator had removed them and snapped the unfortunate victim's spine in half to fit her into the bag. She had spent just over a week in the water before being discovered. However, that was all the police could determine for certain because the killer had made maximum efforts to destroy all clues to her identity. The skull injury from a recent attack by her boyfriend could have provided a clue to her identity besides dental records, but all the police had was an unnamed torso, lacking any name, teeth, surgical scars, birthmarks, tattoos, or fingerprints. Since no missing persons matching her description had been reported in Rotterdam, Melissa was marked as Jane Doe and buried in an unmarked grave in a local cemetery. We will never know exactly how or where she died. We do not know how her killer transported her body from Amsterdam to Rotterdam. Perhaps he took a train, wondering what other passengers would think if they knew what was in his bag. But we do know that in Rotterdam, he chose a canal that ran through the heart of the city, waited for the opportune moment, and simply tossed the bag into the water. As Melissa worked a lot and traveled on assignments, Her family in Ohio did not immediately realize they hadn't heard from her in a while. The last time she left a message on the answering machine, congratulating her mother on her birthday, and then she stopped calling. So in November 1990, the family hired a lawyer to investigate her disappearance. But they realized it too late. Her apartment was completely empty and meticulously cleaned, with no trace of the former tenants. Melissa had vanished, and John returned to Britain, embarking on his search for love, girls, once again. And her name was Delia Baymer. Having met John at a pub in early 1991, Delia was struck by the charisma of a man who lived a seemingly heavenly life. Being overly trusting by nature, she quickly allowed John to move into her apartment, just 1.5 miles from the Battlebridge Basin Canal in London's Paddington. But together they appeared to be a strange pair. She was a fragile blonde, a nurse who saved lives, and he was a red-haired psychopath with one past murder, one attempted murder, and at least one future murder. Delia brought warmth and coziness into the home, while John complemented it with illicit substances, alcohol, a tarantula, stacks of horror magazines, and a collection of gruesome paintings depicting scenes of violence, severed body parts, blood, torture, and headless female bodies. As before, he quickly revealed his true nature, striving to exert full control over Delia's life and exploding with rage if things didn't go the way he wanted. 2 years later, Delia gathered the courage to ask him to leave. He agreed, but he kept delaying the moment, continuing to exert control over every aspect of her life. In 1994, Delia managed to escape his watchful gaze and spent a day with a friend. When she returned, John flew into a rage. As punishment, he tied the helpless woman to her bed, using the same rope he had once used to bind Melissa's lifeless body. For unbearable 48 hours, he tortured Delia, repeatedly violating her, beating her, strangling her, and threatening her. John held a gun to her head and threatened to cut out her tongue with a kitchen knife if she screamed. In his frenzy, he began to tell her the story of his previous girlfriend, who had tried to leave him and supposedly met her end in the canals of Rotterdam. Allegedly, he caught her with 2 Germans. He killed all 3, not knowing what to do with them. He sat with the bodies for 3 days. On the 3rd day, he dismembered them, packed them into bags, and threw them into the canal. Delia had studied John well and didn't even attempt to argue, curse, resist, or scream. She didn't even allow herself to think about it, as if he could read her thoughts. Perhaps that's why, like Anne, he didn't kill her. And no one knows why. The man fled to Germany, but since the police knew his appearance and the fake names he used, he was arrested and deported back to Britain. Her tormentor sat in prison, but Delia was convinced that he would find a way to get to her sooner or later. On Thursday, December 26, 1994, 3 days before Christmas, John was put under house arrest. Just a few hours later, as the sun was setting, with a cold winter wind and snowflakes falling from the sky, Delia finished her shift and carefully rode her bicycle onto the road leading to her home. The dark street was empty, illuminated only by the flickering lights of television screens, Christmas garlands, and the dim orange glow of street lamps. Delia leaned her bicycle against the fence near the steps that led to her apartment entrance. It was quiet, peaceful, and safe, or so it seemed. As always, she propped the door with a brick and went back to get her bicycle. Delia was already halfway up the steps, looking around, asking herself if he was hiding in the darkness, when she glanced to the right again and saw his enraged face. Without wasting a second, Delia quickly pushed the brick, allowing the door of her house to slam shut right in front of her. She knew it was better to confront John on the street. If he pushed her into the house, she wouldn't stand a chance to escape. With raised hands, bulging eyes, and clenched teeth, John struck the fragile and defenseless woman with a 2-kilogram axe while reaching for a knife. He hit her in the chest, piercing her lung, then her thigh, and swung the axe, severing the tip of his finger. Delia could have died, but she didn't. She pulled the bicycle towards her to shield herself from the blows. The sound of the axe scraping against the metal of the bicycle was heard by her neighbor, Giles Allen. Grabbing a baseball bat, he rushed out of his house and chased after John on the street. But John quickly vanished into the darkness, being the coward that he was, afraid to confront a worthy opponent, someone like himself. For the next 6 years, while John remained on the run, friends warned Delia to be cautious, believing that he would come back to finish what he started. But Delia didn't care anymore because she was no longer herself. And even though, after 6 years, 10 parts of a woman's body, carefully packed into 6 different bags, would be discovered at Battlebridge Basin, a London dock in the Regent's Canal, bearing a striking resemblance to Melissa's murder, Delia Bamer would not be the victim. That woman was still alive, because she still had to become John Sweeney's future ex-girlfriend. Having gone on the run, John didn't make much effort to lay low. He headed north, where he visited his mother, as well as his ex-wife Anne and their children. On January 2, 1995, just 11 days after the attack on Delia, John sent a letter to the police and Scotland Yard, boasting about his crimes and claiming they would never catch him. Since the red-haired butcher was easy to find, he decided to hide in another European country. He disappeared from all radars for 6 years. What happened to him during those years, where he was, what he did, and whom he possibly killed, remains unknown. The only certainty is that he returned to his gruesome drawings, promising brutal retribution against women who dared reject him. However, in early 2000, he came back to Britain, where he resumed his search for love. And her name was Paula Fields. As one of 11 children in a poor family living in the poorest district of Liverpool, Paula's childhood, along with her brothers and sisters, was challenging, but their troubles were only beginning. When Paula was 9 years old, her mother passed away, and the children were sent to relatives or placed in shelters. As she grew older, Paula tried her best to become a great mother to her own children. That's why she decided to move to London in search of a better life for her 3 sons, but things only got worse. After 2 years of constant hunger, suffering, and despair, she turned to the oldest profession. In the autumn of 2000, as a homeless woman of loose morals, with no chance of regaining custody of her children, who had been taken by Child Protective Services, Paula's life seemed to hit rock bottom. It was during this time that she met and fell in love with a bearded, red-haired butcher known as Liverpool Joe. Paula, battered and beaten, moved in with him. But what began as an endless cycle of emotional blackmail, psychological pressure, and physical violence soon led to her demise. At 9:30 a.m. on Friday, December 15, 2000, Paula was last seen entering John's apartment. Just 2 days later, the true nature of her beloved was revealed, and 2 days before he moved out of the rented flat, Paula was never seen alive again. On Monday, February 19, 2001, during the school holidays, 2 school children were fishing at the Battlebridge Basin when they noticed a partially submerged black bag. Being boys, they retrieved the heavy bag, hoping to find treasures or at least stolen valuable items. They were shocked for the rest of their lives when they opened the bag and found bricks and body parts. The police recovered 5 more similar bags from the water, but they did not find any hands, feet, heads, or any items or documents. Like Melissa, Paula could have become another Jane Doe, as John had once again gotten away with murder. Or he would have, if he hadn't made a huge mistake. He left one victim alive. Since the police became aware that the wanted assailant for the attack on Delia Bamer had been seen in London, all constables received his description. On Friday, March 23, 2001, the red-haired butcher Joe Johnson was spotted at a construction site. Knowing that he might be armed, the police added their most prepared officers. He indeed had a knife and a gun in his locker. In his apartment, they found more weapons, ammunition, machetes, a homemade bamboo garrote, a baseball bat, a wig with brunette hair, a change of clothes, an axe, handcuffs, garbage bags, a bag with saws and hammers, and over 200 drawings and poems depicting torture, dismemberment, and the death of women. For the attempted murder of Delia, John was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And although he boasted about many murders of his former girlfriends, as well as presumably 2 Germans whom he allegedly caught in bed with Melissa, without evidence, the law was powerless, and investigators feared that John would be released early from prison in a few years and simply disappear. But then another victim of John provided an important clue that helped remove the dangerous criminal from the streets forever. And she did it from beyond the grave. On June 12, 2007, thanks to the advancement of genetic technology, the Dutch police obtained the DNA of the woman whose torso was pulled out of the Rotterdam Canal 18 years ago. By joining forces, Scotland Yard and the Dutch police not only identified Melissa and Paula but also linked their murders, the method of disposing of the bodies, and the identity of the killer, John Swine. In court, the most reliable and crucial evidence against the defendant became his own paintings and poems. Detectives were able to establish a chilling connection between the drawings and the murders he was suspected of. In particular, on one drawing, investigators noticed an element hidden under correction fluid. Under ultraviolet light, forensic experts were able to see what was drawn there. It turned out to be a tombstone with the inscription, "Rest in peace, Melissa." But why would he hide this fragment of the painting if he considered all his works simply art? Because it was evidence he knew about Melissa's death long before her remains were identified. Another painting titled "Beautiful Night" in Vienna depicted an army bag with something inside. It was in such a bag that Melissa was found. However, clues were provided not only by John's paintings. 2 poems represented something like a biographical description of his relationship with Melissa, and 2 hinted or even explicitly spoke of the girl's death. For example, one poem ended with the line, "When I die, perhaps we will become one whole," meaning that she had died, and he knew it for sure. Although the press dubbed John Swine as the Canal Killer, he considered himself a scalp hunter as he signed one of his works, an image of a man with a bloodied axe and a scalp with light hair. The hair most likely belonged to Delia, whom he dedicated the piece to, so to speak, wishing her to depart from life in the most painful way possible. The paintings depicting the murder of Paula were no less disturbing, and he continued to paint her even in prison. Although he was never tried for other murders, the police believe that John's drawings may contain clues to the identities of other victims, particularly 2 women whom the police have never been able to find. They did not find the other body parts of Melissa and Paula. Delia believes that John could have hidden them within the walls of the buildings he worked on as a carpenter. At least, that's what he did with his pet tarantula. On Monday, April 4, 2011, 54-year-old John was found guilty of the murders of Melissa and Paula. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Such a punishment is extremely rare in Britain, but the judge emphasized that Swinney is too dangerous to ever be released again.